holding. This is one of a particular close to my heart. It's all about people. It's about you as a person, and it's about the people you employ, and actually getting the best for everybody. Having run a business for over 20 years, I very clearly understand the importance of recruiting the right people, but keeping them on board and really looking and nurturing the talent that you have available to you. We've got some fantastic presenters today. I'll introduce them as we go along, but quite very briefly, we've got Scott Charlish from Brewing Dolphin, Simon Bucknell from EMBS Talent. We've got Rachel Bull from, so I've got to look at multiple screens here, but here we go. From Engage and Grow, Chris Hill from Vested, Reese Wyburn from our headline sponsors, Shakespeare Martin, so very grateful for them. And we've got Rachel as well, Rachel Riley from the CFO Centre. So we've got a great array of presentations coming up. I think we've got 6 overall. Really, really important stuff. So talking about people, we are recording this. And if you're on the call, if you could mute your microphones and switch your cameras off, that would be absolutely fantastic. Without any further ado, so yeah, any questions? What we want to do is to make this as interactive as possible. So if during somebody's presentation you've got some questions you want to ask or you want to make a point, please pop it into the chat. I'm sort of monitoring that at the same time, and all the presenters are quite happy for me to butt in and sort of ask them those questions and trying to open it out into kind of a bit more of a discussion, make it a bit more interactive. We have 2 10-minute breaks scheduled throughout the afternoon at kind of 2:10, and then again at 3:15. We're hoping to wrap up about 4:20. I say really interactive workshop, really looking forward to getting going. We are going to be holding a Q&A kind of just before each of the breaks, and then definitely at the end we'll have an extended Q&A. I'd like to just talk very briefly about the innovation challenge itself. So part of this is about the 4 workshops that we're holding. So we've done finance. This one's all about people. Next, it's about product and IP, and then the final one is all about commercialization and actually making money out of our business ideas. So we've got some fantastic presenters across those 4 workshops. However, running behind this is the actual innovation challenge competition. And a lot of the presenters have kindly donated kind of 5 days time and effort for the winners to access. So if that's around IP, it might be around helping you understand what painting strategy you should have. If it's around the legals, then Shakespeare's will be offering up to 5 days help on that. Likewise with the key presenters here today. So it's a really generous offer, but it's a fantastic opportunity for the winners to access the expertise they need to move their companies to the next level. There is a 5,000 cash prize. Any company can enter into this. We are particularly after really SMEs and younger start SMEs who are sort of up to 3 to 5 years old at the early stages of their career, perhaps doing technology development or software development, kind of with a bit of an innovation piece in there about, so you're doing something very clever, hard to accomplish, but really is hopefully going to be a market winner. So we welcome applicants from any kind of industry sector. Please have a look online. All the links will be sent around with the workshop slides later on. It's a great opportunity to expose your company to some fantastic PR. So please try and engage with that. And the big event is going to be in October. The actual applicants close on the 31st of July. Okay, I do love this quote from Donald Rumsfeld. As we know, there are known knowns, and there are things we know, but there are also known unknowns. That's to say, we know that there are some things we do not know, but more importantly, in a summation, there are a lot of unknown unknowns. So things you don't know. And the idea of these workshops is to actually open your mind to some of the areas that you think you know about, but perhaps there's some stuff you don't know about that you should know about to actually help you grow your business. So God bless him, Donald Rumsfeld. Can you believe that's 20 years old, that quote? That's I was barely out of my shorts at school in 2002, by the way. There's make conjuring pictures with words, unfortunately, to try and move that out of your heads. Okay, we're going to get going now. These are the speakers. I've touched on them very briefly. So I'm going to be hosting it for the day. And then we've got Scott, then Simon. So that's up until the break time. We're then moving on to Rachel and Chris. Rachel Bull from Engage Grow, and then Chris Hill from Vested. And then finally, we've got Reese from Shakespeare's, finally with the CFO Centre, all about getting that non-executive director, chief financial officer into your business. So a fantastic array of speakers. Thank you very much, everybody, for offering your time today to support us. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Scott now. So if our other presenters could perhaps switch their cameras off, please, while we do this piece. Scott, it'd be quite nice if you left yours on. So at least I can see you on one of my screens. Oh, look at that little smiley face. Fantastic. So I'll stop sharing, Scott, and I'll hand over to you to move over to yours.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon and welcome, everybody. My name is Scott Charlish. I'm a financial planner at RBC Brewin Dolphin. I've spent 25 years plus, probably near 30, if the truth be told, dealing with SMEs. I've seen some great success stories. Sadly, I've seen a few failures along the route. I've seen people pivot and change their objectives and ambition during their journey, because the reality is that life requires that. And this afternoon, well, for the next 15 minutes, I'm just going to share some, I suppose, of my observations as to how I've experienced the engagement with those companies. So let me share some slides, because that's what we do.
I see, Scott, you got the memo about a pink shirt and a kind of casual cardigan look today.
Always. It's the new uniform, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, has that opened up?
Yeah, we're good to go there, Scott. Good to go.
Okay. Thursday is about people and recruitment, and my co-presenters this afternoon will be developing this theme. But I wanted to start the afternoon with the most important person, you, the business owner, because it all stems from the business owner as to how a company will develop its ambition, its people, and meeting its objectives. But for people to invest in you, they have to believe in you, and that involves if it's believing in you because they're going to invest, or you're going to recruit, or you're going to sell the idea, the vision. But looking after you, I frequently see as being sidelined, because the business is everything. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that over the next few minutes. So, question to begin with is, what currently, or what do you think is your biggest financial risk? There's no specifically right answer to this, by the way, but just like whatever it is in your mind, and all answers aren't valid, but just hold that in your mind for a moment, because in an ideal world, what do we all want? Well, start off with to stay healthy. We take it for granted a lot of the time, but we do need to look after ourselves. I think we've all experienced that day when perhaps we are sat at the computer, don't really move around very much, and feel horrible at the end of the day, almost lifeless. Well, that can extend beyond the day. But having good energy is really important to inspire those around you, and almost to focus on looking after yourself also. 25 years ago, hardly anyone would have been discussing mental well-being. It's at the fore these days, but it is really important to look after oneself. We take health for granted, but it makes us feel able to engage with the challenges that come along. But what is also important is financial security. I took part in an initiative a few years ago that Brewin's was developing about well-being in the workplace. Went to see some large employers, sampled some of the information that came back from the employee base. It's really surprising, the sort of things that people were worried about. But it's basics. It's that they worry about their futures. It's not so much about the stability of their employer, but it's their futures and how they will develop with that employer. Pensions always comes up. Managing debt, buying a house. These are all issues that the employee base will be concerned about, and has to be reflected in the way that we recruit and we deal with people, and we promote financial well-being in the workplace as much as anything else. Ultimately, both of these lead to contentment, but I'm not sure the graphics quite captures what I was trying to say here. Contentment with ambition, it just means you're content where you are on your journey, but it's important to know what your journey is. And so you have you have the ability to plan and not just be sideswiped by events. Because if you have your health, financial security, the ability to plan, you're in a good spot as an individual. We would want that for all of our employees in our firms, but it is also really important we maintain it for ourselves. Because as a business owner, perhaps the biggest financial risk, to answer the question, is the business itself, because it can become a little bit overwhelming. So this picture of contentment, well, that is always under threat because of distractions, important distractions, but whether it's dealing with tax, payroll, having enough money to meet the payroll, general expenses, marketing, penalties, as did I say, HR, they're all in there. Environmental issues. There's so much to occupy the mind space of a business owner. It can obliterate everything else. And have to be open-eyed that these are real risks that people face. So where does this take us? Well, there's a risk of loss of vision because every day there's something else to consider. So that contentment that we all want becomes under threat because of the noise, perhaps, of running a business and dealing with all those issues. And that will reflect on the business owner for himself or herself, but it can also be felt around their staff, and it affects the way that they appear to those individuals also. So to not let the business overtake one and therefore face the risk of not having a good work-life balance, of not having any financial security, get rid of, and losing the ability to plan, then I would encourage all business owners to focus on what is important for them. And I'll talk about this even today, no matter where you are on the journey, start to rehearse your future. I won't talk about all of these points because I will run out of time and be on Sam's naughty step. But this top left here, I am dealing with a case at the moment. A business owner recently passed away. He was earning good money, taking about 400k a year out of the business. To the outside world, very successful. Didn't have any major debts, but equally, his and his family's future was based upon the assumption that it would always be as they foresaw it. Well, sadly, he passed away. He didn't have much life insurance cover. The family have come to us to help deal with some of the issues with the monies that they are going to be receiving. But I suspect that he was so focused on the business that he never really thought about life insurance for himself and his family. Employees often benefit from group life schemes that are in place, but business owners are often not part of those schemes. So do think about your own family, and do think about the following bullet points on this slide. If you are,
I think that point, Scott, if I may, that point is really, really interesting. So there is the point that if you're an owner manager on your own as the main shareholder, there is a level of cover you need to sort out. But I think equally important is if you're 2 or 3 major shareholders, so you set it up with 2 other people, what happens if one of them goes off sick long term? What happens if one of them dies? What do you want to happen to the shares? And that piece about protection is really, really important, because if you've agreed that you want to continue to pay someone's dividend, even though they've passed away or they're very poorly, how long are the other 2 going to be happy with that? Whereas there's stuff you can put in place that will say, actually, if a member dies of the shareholders, insurance kicks in, it buys them out, and it's all very fair and equitable. They're tricky conversations to have, and they can be very uncomfortable situations, when you start looking at shareholder agreements, but they're really important to get in place fairly early on in the business, aren't they?
Yes, because when entering an agreement with a financial backer, then there will be expectations, but they're normally viewed with rose-tinted spectacles about how the business will succeed. And business forecasting, you can kick the tires and sense check your projections, but the real variable is an individual's health. So whether they pass away, or Sam, absolutely, you correctly identified how illness would strike. What does that mean? And also for the key people in the business. If you do rely on somebody, maybe the person who your rainmaker salesperson, or the person who really holds it all together, if they were unable to work, I suppose there's two questions here. If they were unable to work because they were absent for a short to medium term absence, how would you cope? If it was sad enough that they were absolutely to pass away, how would the business cope? Life insurance for most employees is not very expensive. Perhaps it's more to do, I think, with the time it takes for the business owner to get it into their head as to what they need. But I'd prompt it as a discussion point to consider the key people in your business, because it also affects you. If you have a dream and a plan and ambition for that business, then the foundations are you're relying on other people, and how secure is that? I'll talk about pre-retirement here, because ultimately absolutely all of us have an end game to consider. I mean, pensions, I could talk, I would be unwelcome to talk all afternoon about pensions, but just the concept of what is going to be available to support you towards the end of your working life. And for some people, the dream is their working life might be in their mid-50s. But to think about how to build that up, there's a case. I spoke to a gentleman yesterday. It was on a business group I sit on, and the chap been in business 20 something years. They're looking to sell their business. He was really focusing on how much money he needs as one of the issues, but he's never put anything aside in those 20 years. I do see that reasonably often, the belief that, oh, well, the business will sell for a big lump of money and I will be fine. Well, not only is that always perhaps tax inefficient, it doesn't always pan out that way. And to leave this sort of planning too late is, in my view, an oversight. And it's back to the point I made at the start. The you in this, you are the most important person in this plan. If you are right, everyone else behind you stands a much better chance of being right too. And there's some other points on here. I mean, it's just issues, but ways of building investment for yourself, and also to consider the issues of insurance for other people.
I think one point on there, Scott, is talking about sort of pensions, that as a director or as a shareholder, can't quite remember where, I think as a director, the company can pay your pension contributions direct, and that's before the company pays corporation tax and all the other taxes that you might, if you want to save through an ISA, you've had to pay corporation tax, you've had to pay income tax, you've had to pay national insurance before you put your money in an ISA. Yes, you can access it when you need it, and the income is tax-free, but with a pension, that can come out of a company before you even think about paying any tax on the company profits. So it's kind of worth double the amount nearly. If you want to put £500 away out of your salary kind of thing, you can get 1,000 out of the company for no other, there's just no extra cost involved in doing that. And I think your point is, try and start as early as you can. Although a business is a hungry machine for cash, just thinking about how do I actually start to build up my own nest egg through the company as early as you can. I think that's really important.
Yes. And it's go back to the earlier slide where the business overtakes the person. Whether you are a business owner or an employee, we all plan to have a future, and that future is more secure if you build your financial security along the journey rather than waiting for a major event at the end. For the time, couple of points that summarize here is be prepared. Consider what everybody wants out of the situation. So if you have investors or other shareholders, think what they want. Are the times aligned and the time scales aligned? Sometimes businesses buy property, but one person's 50 and the other person's 30. They're not going to retire at the same time. Well, highly unlikely in my opinion. But if they've got something, or their assets are tied up in a building that the company's working from, there's going to be a tension point there. Much easier to plan in advance. The bullet points here about considering what you already have, but to have a plan so that you're preparing, whether it's for a sale, you know what you will want, and you've identified any shortfall that's from that. a lot going on here and I've run out of time, but
I
happy to
think
speak to somebody at a later
just
stage.
I've got another question for you, Scott. Well, another kind of point. I think as part of your previous slide, it's that sort of planning for your exit. And I think one of the things people often forget about is how much information you need to gather if someone's interested at buying your business. And yeah, some people might call it a data vault. So actually start collecting all the bits of paper you might need should you look to sell your business. Because people generally on a transaction want to move as quickly as they can for efficiency purposes. If you've got to spend 6 months pulling all your data together to underpin everything you've just told the potential buyer, then that can actually put tension into the deal. Whereas if you're collecting that data early on, you can actually have it all ready to hand over. So that kind of that preparation for sale piece.
Yes, spot on, Sam. You know, this whole thing about rehearse your future. If you get your ducks in a row now, you're going to be in a much better position in the future. And I'll just summarize here. You know, this talks about the top left. It's think about what's important to you and you first, because get that right, everything else can follow. The flow chart in here talks about other issues that can be brought into the conversation. But for this afternoon, let me just leave with the message that look after yourself, your health, your financial security, mindful of doing the same for your employees, and there's a much better prospect for success.
Well, fantastic. Thank you very much, Scott. I think there's some really powerful messages there. And ultimately, you can build that team around you to give you the best possible foundations, but actually give you the right guidance through your life, and actually planning early and making sure you're looking after yourself and then your employees is really, really important. So thank you very much. Got a question here from Donald. How this is a $1 million question. How do you value a business for sale?
Ooh, how do you? There are so many different answers to that, Donald. When I'm asked that in a client situation, I do turn it around, because I think the answer is, how much do you need out of the business first? Because whether somebody offers you X or Y, with Y being the larger figure, neither may be appropriate because you don't know what you want. And I can think of a situation 8 or so years ago. There's a chap, he had what was I thought was a decent offer at the time, but he decided he was going to wait for longer. Well, sorry, wait out for more. He sold out about 5 years later for half of what he had been offered to begin with. And give me a minute, Samuel, I'll just expand, because what happened, he was offered this sum of money, and the due diligence came forward and they tried to chip him down a bit because his paperwork wasn't super clean. Your point earlier, yeah. It was a very good business, but he hadn't quite got everything he hadn't got everything to look as it should do. So they chipped him down a bit, and he was furious. You know, incandescent. How dare they? My business is worth this, etc. And therefore, rage took over, and he decided not to sell. He was offended, and only realised half of the value, despite having to work another 5 years. Actually, he should have really taken the first figure, not because you might say in hindsight it was the bigger figure, is because it was more than he needed, even after he was chipped down. He should have taken the money. He could have achieved what he wanted to do, but he couldn't see that. He hadn't got the personal plan in place. And I think if he grasped that earlier, then he would have taken the money and be happier. So support your point.
Yeah.
Donald, yeah. I don't know, but start with what you need.
Yeah. So yeah, there's loads of different mechanisms, Donald. So if you've got other shareholders, people often build a rough mechanism into their shareholder agreement. So that gets used every year. The accountant does a valuation of your business, and the mechanism's agreed in your shareholder agreement. That's to do with if one of you dies or has to leave on a good form or bad form, there's a mechanism. Usually it's a multiple of what's called the EBITDA. So that's earning before interest, tax, amortization, and depreciation. It's some string of those words. So it's kind of how much the company makes before things that are uncontrollable, like tax, like how much plant you invested in the depreciation of it. And that value, that multiple of that EBITDA might be anywhere between 2 and 10. and it all depends on the strength of the business, strength of your client base, the longevity of the staff, and how you've tied them in. There's a loads and loads of different impacts on what that multiple might be, but quite often it is a multiple of the EBITDA, and it might be adding the assets of the business or the average of the assets over a period. So you could do an entire workshop, I think, on just valuing business. But I think Scott's point, I think your point there, Scott, was great. It's what do you as a company need? What do you as a person need out of your company to allow you to have the life that you want to have after, once you've sold the business?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Scott. That was absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, next up, we've got, nobody can see this apart from me. We've got a pond in the back garden, and I've just put some new plants in there, and one of them, I can't remember the name of it, back in medieval times was an aromatic, and people used to make their own kind of a tea because the roots are aromatic, and our dogs just found the roots of this plant in my pond, and she's got her head underwater. I can see from here, trying to eat she's gone and got it out of the pond now. I'm gonna have to in a minute just nip and ask my wife to get the dog in. Anyway, there you go, I ramble on. Okay, next up, we've got Simon Bucknell from EMBS Talent. We've worked with Simon over the years on recruitment, and we've worked with him on a few projects, and Simon's going to be talking about getting yourself fit for employing people and what kind of people you need in your business, but also what can you really afford and why perhaps you should go over the top. Simon, I'm going to let you get going. I'm actually going to go and save my plant in my pond before it goes completely out of the window, and I'm going to be back in 30 seconds. So, fantastic. Simon, over to you, please.
Okay, no problem. I'll start by attempting to share my screen and share my presentation. Hope everyone can see that.
Yes, so yeah, we can see that, Simon.
We can see that. Okay, well, I'll let you go and tend to your canine situation, and I'll crack on. So, EMBS, Your Vision, Our Talent. Let me make a simple introduction. My name is Simon Bucknell. I'm the co-founder and talent services director for EMBS, and I've spent for my sins over 25 years working in the technology and engineering recruitment world. I've been a business owner, a recruitment business owner for getting on for 20 years. In fact, May of this year will be my 20th anniversary of being a business owner. So not only have I recruited for my clients, I've also recruited for myself. I've also grown and built my own high-performing teams, made some mistakes, failed, learned, and obviously been successful as a result of those learnings, shall we say, and certainly are able to pass those on to you either on this call or offline if you want to find out a little bit more about what I can do to support you. And I'll go into that information and explain a little bit more about what we do as a business and what I do. So the first thing is that we can deliver a complete range of talent services, and it's important for you to know really that I specialize in the technology and engineering sectors. So when I'm talking to you today, it's very much with engineering and technology in mind. If you're living outside of those sectors, then it will be relevant to you, but perhaps not so relevant. So what else do we do? Well, recruitment fitness training is a thing we'll talk about today. It's a great concept to get you into the right sort of recruitment mindset, and we're going to get into that detail very shortly. In addition to that, and connected to that, we help organizations build employer brands, and I'll explain more about that shortly. We also work with leaders to ensure that they're ready to hire before the actual hiring process. This is about growth and talent strategy and understanding about when the best time to hire is and how you're going to go about doing that. In addition to that, we work with the great team at TBAT Innovation. Hopefully Sam will be back from saving his dog.
I'm back again. I'm back again.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I'm back.
I can just see the presentation in front of me. So
I was about to say I've sent a member of staff to sort it out, but my wife very kindly went up there.
Fantastic, great work.
Because I have no staff.
Well, we'll talk about talent funding and partnerships with TBAT shortly, and Sam and I can explain a little bit about some of that. In addition, we build out digital marketing solutions using video and web to really push outreach to prospective candidates, dropping the right messaging on the right channels to the right people at the right time, and using things like LinkedIn to really get your message across is so important in this market. And we can talk about that as well. And obviously what I do myself is leadership coaching and development, helping leaders get ready to hire, helping them understand more about their businesses themselves, and as we've just been talking about, perhaps their exit and how they're going to scale the business up until that point. In addition, we do the good old-fashioned permanent and contract recruitment services, and also run quite significant outreach campaigns. So we believe that we have a full talent operating system, everything that you could possibly need in order to scale your business before, during, or after the process is covered by our customer value proposition that you see in front of you. But what we're going to talk to you about today is recruitment fitness. And this idea came to me a good few years ago. I was just getting into my own personal fitness, middle-aged, needed to get in the gym, unfit. And at the same time, I was going out and seeing customers. My PT at the time was asking me questions about what I wanted to get out of my own personal fitness. And I was going out to see customers, asking them about their recruitment, their footprint, their online careers websites, their LinkedIn use, their recruitment processes, and all the different things that are really important when hiring. And I realized very quickly just how unfit organizations were with regards to recruitment. It was very reactive. We need somebody now. Job description is written up, and it was just very, very poor. And I started to build a scoring system. I have built a scoring system which allows me to kind of go in as a kind of recruitment fitness personal trainer and look at all the different component parts, all the different pillars of talent and recruitment, and provide a kind of fitness score. And typically, when I start working with clients, they're scoring a 4 or a 5. Sometimes they've got some, good foundations. My job is to get those organizations into a 8, 9, or 10, at which point they'll be ready to hire, but also have the right mindset to retain the people that they've spent all this time and effort and money bringing in the first place. So that's in a nutshell what recruitment fitness is all about. Before we get into that, I think it's really important just to take a minute to understand the market. Now, I'm at the absolute coalface, cut and thrust of recruitment. I'm a headhunter. I'm engaging with all sorts of talent at all different levels. So I'm also on the board of an organization called EMA Training. So I'm passionate about apprentices on the one hand, but recently I placed 150K a year director of software engineering in a large technology business on the other side, and absolutely everything in between. So I feel pretty able to kind of give a really good overview of the marketplace, and that's what we'll do. So really, in summary, COVID, as we all know, gave everyone a chance to experience true flexible working for the very first time, and we've almost got used to that idea. That was a huge moment in history. In Q4 at the end of 2021, when the world got back to normal, knowledge workers started to understand this importance of lifestyle alongside salary and career, and that's really shaped the culture that sits inside many organizations now, and also has become really a thing that a lot of workers take for granted. And I'm sure the participants today and people watching this will understand that is part of their value system, that lifestyle, that flexible working now has been really part of a non-negotiable for them. And that's been a very interesting social, commercial and work-based change that we've obviously come to take into consideration. And post-COVID, the Great Resignation happened as a result of
quick question, Simon.
Say again?
Quick question, Simon. On the the knowledge-based workers, and they're kind of what I'm hearing is that quite a few of them have been quite bullish about, well, I want to work from home most of the time. How are employers now reacting to that? Are they pushing back, saying, well, if you want to be part of our great team, then I want you in? Or how are things changing on that front? Just because that's a really interesting question, both for me as an employer and how I want, in my head, how I want staff to be to be in the office
Sure.
or not. But yeah, so your thoughts would be great on that if you can.
It's a really interesting one, and it's interesting how it's changing a little bit. Certainly, it's very sector specific, and it's also very job specific. For sure, in software engineering and in that technology space, in product design, product development, a role that doesn't necessarily mean require a physical presence in the office. There's very much a split between remote and hybrid. In software engineering, really, when I'm recruiting software engineers now, the question before salary is, what is it remote? That's hashtag, is it remote? That's the question that I get asked. After we get over that, we then talk about the tech stack, and then we talk about salary. And within that conversation, other things are more important than remote, like learning and development. But to answer your question, and I will allude to this in the presentation, so we can flip over that slide when we get there. But certainly there is a move towards hybrid and remote. But there are some interesting things happening, and I'll talk about it in a second. So let me answer that question through my presentation. So that's okay.
Good, thank you. Sorry.
So this trend is settled, as we've just been talking about. Fully remote jobs are down, actually. So advertised remote jobs have actually dropped a little bit in the last 6 to 12 months, interestingly. So you know, there's clearly a change, perhaps a subtle change happening in the marketplace. And really, in that technology and engineering world, hybrid has now become the default. And especially with the young, the early years is the bit that's I think people have struggled with the most, because firstly, graduates and young people want to experience what it's like to work in an office. They want to make friends, they want to build their social networks, and they want to be present. For the most part, when you talk to young people when they finish university, they want to go to work. They don't want to be working in their bedsit, you know. But most importantly, from the perspective of learning and development, they want to be in an environment where they're being mentored by other people, more senior people, more experienced people, and you know, that's really important to them. So organizations have had to kind of almost deal with that. It's kind of very much employer driven in that sense, and that's a really interesting thing. Also, organizations are starting to understand that building culture, really strong culture, when you have a completely remote workforce, requires a different set of skills and a different methodology, a different ideology. And that's tough, especially when you're in a startup scale-up mode. Everyone's banging the drum. Everyone wants to be purposeful and get behind something. If you're so far away from it, it can be really, really difficult to do that. The other thing, just while we're on the subject, which is noticeable, I think, is that in specific markets and sectors, that employment itself has become very transactional. So I'll give you a great example. So software engineers can log off on a Friday from their home computer and log on a Monday to a different set of credentials, a different platform. And that is the difference between starting and ending a job and starting a job. They sit in the same seat. They use the same technology. They're just using the same technology in a different team in a different company. But the days of walking through an office and saying good morning to the receptionist and finding the coffee machine, it's not like that for a lot of people anymore. So as a result, employment has become transactional. It's very easy to get a job. You can be interviewed in your home office, which is where I'm sitting now. You don't need to leave your home to find work. And that has been a really fundamental change, and actually is likely to kind of permeate across more broad sectors as things move on, because the tech sector is always the trailblazing sector. Yeah. We digress there, Sam. You got any questions?
I was going to say, but that as you say, employment is transactional. Someone's just popped it in the chat there, but that to me is the importance of trying to encourage people into for the business. So you build that team spirit face to face, and they make friends, and it's another sticking point. They don't want to leave their friends, perhaps. Whereas, as you say, if they're sat there in their underpants in the bedsit doing coding, they have no loyalty to anybody, do they?
Completely right.
And we want people in as well into the business, so we can check really on their mental health and their mental well-being. Because if they're just hiding behind a camera, you've got no idea what's happening in their lives. Whereas if they're coming in, just that chance conversation over a coffee, or you're just walking through the office, you say, oh, yeah, how you doing, Joe? You can have a little chat. And I think that's the hybrid workplace is certainly where we as a company are going as kind of professional services, and it's interesting that that's where it's going, and that's what the business needs.
Absolutely. And one of the things that's really important to think about that, and we're going to talk about it in a second, is how you build this into your proposition as an employer. And we'll get into that. So
Yeah.
Let's keep talking about the market. Now, excuse the acronym here, this TWAT, but this is what's happening. Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, as part of that hybrid model, is now the default hybrid model. That's what it means. I hope I don't offend anybody by that, but that's basically what it is. So we will move on. Obviously, we're now back to normality to a point, but interestingly, vacancy numbers have fallen. So we've only got the data from really the last quarter, but the vacancy numbers have fallen, and they've fallen for the 8th consecutive quarter, down by 4.3% September to November. And they've fallen in almost all of those major sectors, but actually, interestingly, they are still pretty robust in the engineering, IT, and life sciences sector. So if you think through listening to the media that we're this tightening up of the market and that, unemployment is rising, they're talking about this from a sort of more global perspective. When you're drilling into the specific markets, there are still huge issues in these spaces with regards to supply and demand. And I just appeal to anybody listening to this, I'm sure you already know this, but just don't believe the hype. Just understand what it's going to be like in your niche, your market, your sector, and don't look at those overarching unemployment figures. In December 22 to February 23, total vacancies were down by 162,000, which sounds like a lot, but actually they remain 328,000 above the pre-coronavirus levels, so 2019 levels. So that means the market's really strong, really robust. Lots of hiring going on, lots of activity going on. In December 2022, workforce jobs rose by 211,000 on the quarter to a new record. And this just shows you just what's going on in the market in reality with hard data from the Office of National Statistics. What does that look like? Well, this is an interesting little chart. You can see that dip in COVID and then that huge growth and demand as we've bounced back, not just a bounce back, but actually a significant amount of growth. And obviously we can see that tailing off. It's been a very interesting time in recruitment, because really 2021 into 22, it's been like your birthday and Christmas all rolled into one. And it was a bubble, and we can refer to it really in the past tense because things are flattening off and tightening up now.
Yeah, and with a nation the size of the UK, and obviously the impact of Brexit and perhaps foreign workers being able to come in, and we need those people coming in, but there you go, that's a completely different question. And the retirees, is there going to be now a new level of kind of what is the number of vacancies that we would look for in the UK? Is that going to sort of level out at 350,000, 400,000 is kind of where we should be, which is kind of a measure of the churn in the job market and the growth in.
It's such a hard question to ask and answer, and you have to break that question down sector by sector, role by role, and really get your heads around and understand it. The one thing that I will just say, which is something that's slightly connected with this, and I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but what's really interesting in the world of work right now is automation and artificial intelligence and the impact that is having on the world of work and the layer of those jobs. When we talk about sector by sector, role by role, that low end early years world that our kids have historically entered into through administrative or operational roles, that's the worry for me around how the AI and automation world is going to change that. And actually, if you've got kids at school or at university, they are going to work in jobs that have not been created yet. And the problem with that is that education and business can't really help our children because we have no idea what that looks like. And that's incredibly exciting, but actually absolutely terrifying all at the same time. So when we talk about skill shortages in this presentation, we're talking about the ones that we can see today. But I think for the first time, possibly in history, we have no understanding of the end of the runway. We can pontificate about it, but we're not completely sure what it looks like, because as you will have all seen, ChatGPT and AI has just exploded in the last 6 months, and it's going to be really interesting to see what that impact that has on your business as you grow and scale, and what impact that has on your hiring and the sorts of people you hire. But we digress. So the question and the situation is this: we still have major skill shortages, we still have major supply issues, and we have major issues with salary inflation, specifically in the tech and digital and high tech and engineering spaces. And it's brought about by supply and demand. But also, there's a big motivation for people to make the move because of the cost of living crisis, energy bills. People are moving for £2,000, £3,000, £4,000 a year extra on base salary because, they've just had this huge increase in their energy costs. So they're motivated to make a move. They're asking for pay increases at work. If that's not happening, they're putting their hands up and coming to people like me and saying, it's just not happening. I'm really struggling. What am I worth in the marketplace? And can you help me, get a salary bump alongside other things? But salary is a huge motivator. And that's something that's really important to understand when you're going through the process, because if you offer somebody something and they've not had a pay increase, what happens when they come to resign is they get the pay increase, they get the counter offer, and then the person that you think you've lined up for the job is no longer a candidate. So top tip today, if you're going through a recruitment process, ask the candidate, when was the last time you had a review? When was the last time you had an appraisal? Because you need to know that for the counter offer mitigation reasons. Hope that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Yeah.
Great. So supply and demand issues. Candidates tempted by high salaries, cost of living crisis, the market is as competitive as ever. Don't believe the unemployment figures, don't believe the hype. It's mad out here. And you've got to be prepared and ready to go. Hence the reason why you've got to be prepared to get super recruitment fit. The other interesting thing about the market, and we've been watching this happening in the last 18 months, there was a thought that there'd be a salary harmonization. So actually salaries would go from north to south. In other words, southern companies would be able to recruit people in the north a little bit more cost effectively. It's not working out that way. So northern companies are having to increase their salaries to compete with southern employers, and therefore the salary levels across the whole of the UK are harmonizing and increasing. Which is, so for example, if you're in Manchester, you're a data science person, why would you work remotely for a company in Manchester when you can work for a remote company in London and earn more money? So this harmonization thing that's really interesting, that's really happening as well. So all that's feeding into the market, and it's a really interesting market. It's a really, tricky market to operate on, and this is why we've got to get super fit. Not enough graduates, not enough apprentices. High percentage of the workforce coming into retirement, specifically in the engineering space, and it's really creating that perfect storm. And the competition for talent is therefore at unprecedented levels. And really, because of the things we've been talking about, AI and automation, poor numbers of apprentices, poor numbers of graduates, it's just going to get worse over the next 3 to 5 years. And if you're looking to scale your business, you need to be on your A game. You need to be prepared and ready to go. And you need to be more than a 3 or a 4 on your fitness scale. You need to be way up there. 63% of technology and engineering employers expect to face a shortage in 23, and a quarter, 24%, saying that the shortage of talent will really impact their growth. Nothing more frustrating than having a great business idea or a great innovation and not being able to actually scale the business because you can't get your hands on the talent.
Just thinking out loud here, Simon. So with this transactional employment thing, it'll be quite interesting when you do get somebody coming forward for a job, actually seeing how many jobs they've had in over what period, and you can see if they're just chasing the buck or they actually have some allegiance to some of their employers. And if you've got somebody that might have all the right skills and all the rest of it, but they've changed job every 3 months, you might think, well, you can do everything, you'd be fantastic, but with the cost of the recruitment fee, the cost of training you how to work, how we like, you might bugger off in 3 months because you're just chasing the buck on somebody else. So
yeah,
it's quite an interesting, people may need to mature in their outlook on what jobs they take and how often they move. I don't know. Is that a valid point, or is that
again, in software and data engineering, 24 months is long service, and we're going to get into the reasons and some thoughts around how you can keep people in your business longer. But the reality is, because of its transactional nature, somebody will join a business and have an experience, so that they will want an experience, and that experience might be, I'd like to be involved in this product development. I'd like to see the product development through the full life cycle. I'd like to see it be in production and go out to market. When I've been through that life cycle, which could be over 24 or 36 months, I can't get any more out of this experience, and therefore I'm going to make a move. And so certainly when you think about roles like that, they are transactional. There is a life cycle there. And actually, a lot of the clients that I work with are like, if I get 24 months and they deliver the project, that's actually more cost effective than hiring a contractor. So I'm all right with it. And that's really weird. And actually, that's changing, certainly changing the culture of the employment market, to the point where I don't hear as many objections from my clients about, oh, look, that candidate's a job hopper. Whereas before it was like, if they've not done 36 months continuously, then, you know, so there's some really interesting things happening in that space.
Yeah, I was questioning more of the short term, sort of the 3 to 6 month job hopper. For me, 2 to 3 years is fair game. They've done their time.
If they're less than that, Sam, they're going to be a contractor, and that's absolutely okay. And if they've not lasted more than 12 months, then yeah, you've got right. Even if they're a permanent employee, you've got to get under the skin of what's going on there and what the problem is. By the way, references these days are really not worth, you know, you don't have the reference thing you used to, because HR people will give you a dates reference. They won't give you a character reference. So really, they don't add any value. And so your recruitment process has just got to be that much better. And that's what we're going to get into. So let's get back in. Skill shortages, specifically in cyber, BI, data science, software engineering in my space, are crazy. And we'll talk about the speed of hiring, but I know people that have been on and off the market in just a matter of a few days. So with skills in such short supply and availability predicted to be worse, we've got to be in the peak condition to attract and retain the best talent. And that's where we get into recruitment fitness. But before we start the recruitment fitness training, it's essential to understand the rules of the game, the competition, and the challenge that lies ahead. To win the race, and we've just been talking about race in the sense of speed. To win the race for talent, you must increase your recruitment fitness. We've just been talking about that. So where do you start? There's two things to think about before you even start. The first is to reflect on what makes your company a great place to work. This is the starting point of developing your employer brand and your employee value proposition. And when you've worked out why you think the company is a great place to work, take it that next step and work out what makes your company a unique place to work. Now, uniqueness comes from a series of different things. It's not always just one thing. It can be a combination of things. So you've got to go to town and got to go to work and talk to stakeholders, the senior leadership team, and the workforce about why they love working for your business and what makes you unique. Have a session, have a workshop, and get that information together. Every time somebody says something, stick it on a Post-it note, in a boardroom, in a meeting room. Pull that whole thing together, and that's the starting point for your employee value proposition and your employer brand.
Might you do that through a third party or an anonymous survey, so people feel very comfortable in saying exactly what they think, instead of sort of a workshop where the MD's there and, you know, you go, whoa, I can't possibly tell them it's shabby company to work for.
It's a brilliant point, Sam, that you raise. And what I say to you is, first of all, you need to be confident that your workforce is engaged and happy. Because if they're not, you're not going to like what you hear. However, if you don't deal with the issues that are raised in that moment, people are going to leave anyway.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's a big moment. This is not something that, you know, you just do. This is a big moment. It's joined up thinking. It's proper talent strategy. So absolutely, you can get me in to do the workshop, happily do it for you. Or you can have a Survey Monkey online survey anonymously. Personally, I think it's great to communicate with the team that you are in this space, that you want to improve, that you want to listen, but you better be able to action things if things get a little bit ugly. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So next question, and the thing that you and I we're going to talk about, which is once you've really formulated why you're a great place to work and what makes you a unique place to work, it's then about understanding the roles, the role levels, and this is a really important point, the role trajectories. Okay, so in my life, in my world, in my sort of view, no role can be static ever. Okay, so you must always have somewhere for someone to go. I had a conversation yesterday with a client, and it was quite embarrassing. And I said, "Great job. Where's the person going to go? Like you told me you want an amazing candidate. You told me that you want an ambitious candidate. You told me that the skill set needs to be X, Y, and Z. But what's the role going to turn into? Where are they going to go next? Tell me about that." And there was an absolute silent moment, tumbleweed moment. And they said, we're going to need to come back to you on that. And I said, well, look, you've got a couple of options here. You can either just get them to come and do a job, and guess what's going to happen? In 18 months' time, they're going to leave. Or you can look at this team as an academy and grow your people organically out into different departments and give them the learning and development, because that means you're going to hold on to them for longer. This trajectory idea is so important, and it's part of your employee value proposition. It's part of your employer brand. If you believe in your learning and development, it becomes part of your value system as an employer. And that's a very cool thing. But we could do a workshop on that, right? But for the purpose, were you going to say something, Sam?
Yeah. So I remember donkeys years ago when I worked at Rolls-Royce, there was a big thing with them losing talent because the company said everybody needs to be a manager. And what is obvious is that not everybody wants to be a manager. It may not be just how they want to operate. So actually they introduced, and this is going back 40 years, a technology ladder and a managerial ladder.
Okay.
So your point there about the role trajectory, it's not old fashioned as in there's a pyramid and you will make your way up this ever tightening pyramid to get to the top. The Rolls-Royce model gave you as a technologist a career path to become a senior technologist and principal technologist kind of thing. So you were rewarded and could grow your career from both a managerial and or a technical perspective. That was Rolls-Royce 40 odd years ago.
You know what? My business is small, and I understand how difficult it is as a small business to offer trajectories. Like there is only so much you can do in reality, but next to the job specification that you write should be the best endeavors statement around what the person should be able to do and develop. And if you're an ambitious business leader with a plan to scale the organization, part of that plan should be about the scaling of the people inside the business, not just the scale for the business itself, right? So it stands to reason. And if you get this right, you end up keeping people, and they're actually superpower. They supercharge your growth, you know?
Yeah.
Now, you and I were going to talk about this, and this is the first interesting TBAT and EMBS connection, which is once you've decided the role, what level of role are we looking at? Let's say we're looking for a data engineer or a software engineer, for example. Is this a person with masses of capability and skills that can come into an organization and transfer their knowledge out into the team? Or is this a graduate with an industrial placement that's super hungry and ambitious that wants to get on? Because the price points for these hires are very, very different. And the conversations that you and I have had, Sam, have been around how funding allows those decisions to take a slightly different angle. Do you want to just say your piece on that?
So quite interestingly, in the last workshop we did, it was all about funding growth in your business. The two of the bits that I spoke about were about grants and about R&D tax, because that's kind of the key premise of what TBAT's about. But what's chatting with yourself, Simon, it was, do I employ a graduate on 28,000 yes, they're cheap and they may have some of the latest learning from just the university, but they've got no real industrial experience. They don't have the managerial experience, they have the people experience, they don't have the working life experience. Therefore, for me as a newer start company, yes, they might be a cheaper hire, but the cost of actually developing them into somebody as useful as I need them to be is quite a burden. Whereas if I employ somebody who's 5-10 years into that, they might be 2-3 times the cost, but they can deliver everything from scratch. But then if you combine that with an R&D tax claim that can reduce the tax bill in round numbers by 25%, you're suddenly getting very good value. If the technology or the product you're developing is absolutely whiz bang and you can secure an Innovate, for example, Innovate UK grant, if that brings in 70% funding and you've got a 3-year technology roadmap and you know you should be able to grant fund most of that, all of a sudden you're going, actually, I can still do the graduate later on because we do need to get these people into the workplace. But for me as my company today, what I need is absolutely the best I can. How can I mitigate the cost? So if as part of your business strategy and your personnel strategy, you link the two together, then you can actually think, okay, this is my funding pathway, which will give me the best opportunity. And we see that more and more for younger start companies, to allow them to get the best people they can to get that traction in the marketplace, and then they can afford to be let's get the graduates in with their learning, but actually developing into what our company needs.
When you told me that originally, Sam, when you pitched that to me, and I said, hold on a minute, so I can go and talk to CTOs of organizations and my clients and tell them that they can fund their recruitment, their contract recruitment, and their permanent experience hires. And you're like, well, yeah. I was like, that's an absolute game changer for so many organizations. And if nothing else on today, that's such a big headline, in this presentation. I'm going to try and crack on through this as quickly as I can, because I know we're up against the time.
Kind of 5 or 7 minutes kind of thing, Simon.
Sure, no worries. That's fine. I mean, look, when there are multiple stakeholders involved in a recruitment process, what I always identify is that often different people see different roles in different ways. And that's where it all goes horribly wrong. So I send a fantastic candidate. The feedback at first interview is outstanding. I'm thinking, we've got ourselves a deal here. The second interview takes place and it's like they've interviewed a completely different person. And part of the reason for that is that somebody else has interviewed that person that sees that individual in a completely different way. And that might be cultural, it might be technical, but it might be cultural. And so it's so important that all the stakeholders, once they've mapped the uniqueness and mapped and understand the levels and the funding, they see it the same way and they agree it the same way. It's obvious, but it very rarely gets done well in my experience. I'm going to run through these pillars really quickly. Okay, so endurance and stamina. Get a strong employee value proposition and a compelling employer brand and an engaging candidate experience. And it will give you the platform for talent acquisition and development that will deliver lasting and a positive impact on the long-term health and value of your business. And that's what we're talking about here, really. Power and speed. Not only do you need to make decisions quickly, and the only way you'll do that really is if you know what good looks like and you've defined it very clearly and everybody knows about it. But you need it because you need to outmuscle your competitors and actually put this compelling employment offer together. And that gets in front of people quickly. People can quickly understand it and quickly engage with it. And the key thing really here is recruitment tends to happen very reactively. Somebody's left, I need to find somebody. My advice to you is if you're scaling and growing your business, build out your employer brand and market yourself as a destination employer. LinkedIn company pages, social. You need to be marketing your organization like you market your products and services.
Yeah.
Coordination and balance. Recruitment.
I mean, sorry, I keep butting in, Simon. I'm really sorry about that. On that last one, we have got the guys from Invested and Engage and Grow, and that's all about making sure that the people you do get stick with you and what you can do about that. But then Vested is how you get people invested in your company.
Yes.
From not maybe just a cultural way, but actually not tying them in, but encouraging them through share options. So there are a couple of bits we've got coming up later on, which kind of is a bit more of the glue around what you're saying. So it fits in really nicely.
Oh, it does. And if you take those things on board, you will have a bulletproof employee value proposition. Not only that, it will be better than your competitor. And I'm not talking about your competitor that manufactures or produces something that you do. Your competitor for the skills that you want to hire. You've got to be better than that. And guess what? You've got to do a competitor analysis, okay, and really understand that. Or get someone like me to do that for you. Agility and accuracy. Your EVP built on insights is what I'm saying. Insight and data needs to ensure that you're targeting those audiences with the right employer brand. Get out there, get that reach out there, get across the right channels. I can tell you what those channels are and how to do it. Use somebody like me to build out that employer brand. It's so powerful, it's so needed because the market's so competitive. Hitting top form in terms of your recruitment fitness, your EVP and your employer brand will ensure you obviously get the best talent. But this is really, really important. Your candidate experience, the way you treat people through the process, from the first time you engage with them to the end. And even if they've not made it and they've not been successful, you should be setting your stall out and doing the right thing, because they will judge you and they will pass on to their friends and colleagues in their space how you've been treated. Make sure your candidate experience is absolutely bang on. Strength and flexibility. A robust EVP will help you to secure your employer brand, a strong position in the market. Be the one in your geographic location, in your space. Get your marketing team, if you have one, to build the funny thing about this is, Sam, is that marketing teams market products and services. They very rarely market the employer brand. It's a massive gap. It's a massive blind spot. For me, the marketeer should be involved in that as well. Fitness test. We've not got time for the fitness test, but the fitness test ultimately asks you a series of questions. Are you able to clearly and quickly explain the hard and soft benefits of working for your business to existing and prospective employees? Mark yourself out of 10. If you are on the receiving end of your recruitment process now, how would you rate it? Do you interview using behaviors alongside experience? And have you mapped the behaviors of your top performers? What makes your top performers really great at what they do from a behavioral perspective?
And are you thinking psychometric testing type stuff? So, or is that old hat now? I don't know. I did quite a bit back in the day.
You can do that, but I think it's much more simplistic. Do they collaborate? Do they share knowledge? Are they kind? Do they communicate well? Do they show empathy? Do they turn up on time? You know, it's those sorts of behaviours I'm talking about.
I went to a talk and it was something like the chief exec of Timpsons, and who have got a fantastic ethos of employing ex-convicts to give them a new chance in life. Right. But they have a panel who do the interview, and then they have Mr. Men cards. Okay. And they said, we can make a happy person a great cobbler. We can't make a grumpy man a great cobbler. So basically they said, if you're got a good work ethic and you've got the right charisma, we will make you a great cobbler and we will take you on board. It was exactly right. The behaviours and that kind, don't work in silos, spread the love. Really, really important.
When you start thinking about this, it also then dovetails into your employer brand and your values and your employee value proposition. I heard a great saying yesterday. I went to the High Performance podcast in Nottingham last night, and I heard this fantastic saying, and the saying, I need to get this right, is drains don't like fountains. And what that means is negative people don't like working with grumpy people, right? So if you want to have people that are super positive, you want to have a collective group of people that are all very similar in terms of their optimistic outlook. They can have different skills and they can be introvert or extrovert, but it's about having this real positive belief in what's going on. And when you're interviewing people, you should be exploring their positivity, their optimistic viewpoints on life, because you've got to surround yourself by people like that, and that's what will make you successful. And on that note, maybe I'll finish my presentation because I could go on all day.
Yeah, and absolutely fascinating. Just somebody's kindly put a note on. You're likely to lose talent if you start going down the psychometrics route. You know, it basically. I think what they're trying to say is like it's about gut feel. It's about
I
what
think
you
so.
feel as a
I mean,
person.
a lot of big organizations live and die with very complex psychometric testing. The number one thing is use it as a tool and not the rule.
Yeah. Wow. Got another question. We've got 2 minutes, Simon, so
Okay.
please bear with. I'm a small business owner and I complete via recruitment. Currently, I do not have any funding for external support. Are there any grants available? I also think recruitment agents can be like placing a bet. You may win or lose. There are no guarantees because there's no guarantees. But so
Well,
I'll tell you,
I can
if
tell
you
you.
do you want to answer that second piece, and I'll come on to the first bit in a minute. So
I'm
the
just going to
recruitment
say,
agencies are like
yeah,
placing
look,
a
I
bet.
mean, yeah, some are 100%. I'm very proud to tell you that I have 100% fill rate. And the reason for that is I will only take on pieces of work and clients that I know I can deliver to. I think sometimes that our industry is guilty of being trying to be all things to all men. Again, we could talk about this further. The recruitment industry is broken. You know, this idea of giving your vacancy to 3 companies, you wouldn't give an architect, you know, you wouldn't give your extension plans or your house plans for 3 architects and all get, you know, this is about working with the right partner in the right way and leaning into them and getting them to support you. If that's been your experience, it's because you've had the wrong partner. That's it.
Yeah, and again, it's that building that long-term relationship. So the people you use for recruitment know you as a company, know the ethos of the company, the trajectory of the company. It's getting to know people. And the bit about grant funding, depending on the sector that you're operating in. So, for instance, if you're in the med tech kind of area in and around the Midlands, Medilink have certainly had grants in the past that are likely to be able to help you. If you say, my project is to do the best recruitment I can for this role to help me develop my next product, which is X, Y, and Z, they might have a pot of money that'll actually help you fund perhaps some of that recruitment. And it may not be the recruitment fee at the end, anyway, I don't know, 20% of that year's salary once they've been there for X months, whatever the deal is. But the bit about getting you fit for recruitment and the ethos of the company, and this is your recruitment fitness piece, Simon. I don't see why, depending on your sector, why there are small grants should be available for people like Medilink. I know some of their funding's coming to an end, to actually help you get that piece in place to make you fit for the future in today's skills market. I think that could be quite a nice place to go.
And just to pick up on that point commercially, if I was to be approached by a client that wanted me to implement the right frameworks, methodologies, marketing and structure, they would be I would like to think that they would be able to find people more easily themselves. And therefore there wouldn't be a recruitment fee at all. This is all about upfront building the recruitment infrastructure that you need to scale your business. And if anybody feels that they'd like to have those conversations with me, I'm very happy to do that in partnership with TBAP.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, Simon, as always, my friend, you've been fantastic. Thank you very much. And I've quite enjoyed the chit chat. I hope everybody else has found it as interesting as I have. And absolutely awesome. So thank you to you and thank you to Scott for these first 2 talks. We're going to have just a 10-minute break. It was going to be 15. I'd like to try and get up and running again for kind of about 25 past. That would be good. So we've got about 12 minutes there. That'd be really good. So, Scott, thank you very much indeed for your talk. Simon, for yours. Let's have a quick 10-minute break, no more if we can, please. Get back for kind of 25 past, just grab a quick cup of tea. And then we'll talk about other ways of retaining staff and incentivizing them to even greater heights. So look forward to seeing you in 10 minutes. Cheers now.
Can you hear me? Yeah, let me give you a call back.
Well, hello everybody. Hopefully we're all back in the room, all got our cup of tea for the afternoon session. We've got a fabulous hour next of two presentations, one from Engage and Grow Central Midlands and one from Vested. Do we have Rachel with us?
We
I
do.
know that, right? Oh, we
Yeah.
do. All right, lovely. Was it
Yeah.
yourself, Rachel, who was having problems with your broadband? No?
Yeah, we've we've cleverly managed to time our transfer to a new broadband provider today, which was really good timing on our half.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Let me see. I'll well, do you want to put your share your screen as a start for 10, and then we'll get going. So if you just do a little introduction to your company as well, Rachel, about Engage and Grow, and then get going, and I'll butt in, I'm afraid, as and when I think there's something interesting to butt in about.
Please do. I'm going to figure out how to share my screen as I yabber on, because it's only coming out with desktop at the moment, which is no good at all. So I'll just start chatting. So hello everybody. Thank you very much for having me. My name is Rachel Bull. I am the co-founder of Engage and Grow Central Midlands, and we are here to help organisations create very engaged, high-performing workforces. So I'm just trying to see.
Perfect. I can see some.
Share my screen.
I can see some fancy pants rainbowy wave things there.
Yeah, that's not really what we're after.
Well, we could have a surreal chat.
Again. Sorry about this, people.
Okay, I've got the slides if needs be.
Yeah, actually, should we do that? Because I don't want to hold everybody up. That would be great if that's okay.
Yeah, cool. Right, hopefully that. Right, have you got that?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, there we go.
Wonderful. So, what I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to run through a fair bit of stuff. I want you to all leave with some really useful quick wins that you can apply to your business straight away. What would be really useful to get an idea of is if people could just put in the chat box the size of their company. If you don't want to give specific numbers, just a range, but it was useful for me to see where you're at in terms of the number of people that are in your business at the moment. If everybody's happy to share some sort of.
This is also a fabulous test to see who's actually paying attention, Rachel, isn't it?
Who's listening? You can tell I come from a family of teachers. Great, so we've got a really broad range. Awesome. So I'm going to assume whatever size you are, that you're all looking for big fat growth, which is why we're here. And that's exactly what we're going to focus on today. What I want to talk about today is actually helping you help your people become the driving force behind that growth. So if we could just move on to the next slide. Thanks, Sam. It's very nice having a glamorous assistant.
As glamorous as it comes, I must say, Rachel.
Exactly. So this is a really important quote from Deloitte. If you've got any sort of ambitious growth plans, if you want to make any sort of improvement to your business, if you want to make any sort of change, unless you really focus on the people element of it, it's not going to work, which is pretty depressing way to start. But to make any sort of change happen, you need to make behavior change. And Simon was already talking about that behaviors, and I'm going to echo exactly what he said. Behavior change is absolutely crucial for anything to happen. But if you're still a team of one, it's still going to be really useful to you because, again, I'm assuming that you want to grow. You're going to need to recruit brilliant people. You're going to want to keep them. What is a Deloitte resource? Harriet, I'm going to have to find that for you and share with you later because I haven't got it. I've got it on my slides, but I'll dig it out for you. If you're going to want to recruit brilliant people, you're going to want to retain them, but also you want to get the best out of them. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. So let's just move on to the next slide. This is something that I talk about a lot. So a lot of the time with business improvement, organizations focus on the brain. We need better processes, we need a new system, we need better products, procedures, whatever it might be. But if you imagine your company is exactly the same as a human, if our heart doesn't work, if our heart isn't pumping pumping blood to the brain doesn't function very well. And this is exactly what we do at Engage and Grow. We focus on the heart of the organization. We focus on the behaviors, the relationships, the communications, the leadership, the culture, all that sort of thing. If you've got a healthy heart, your brain is going to be healthy. If your heart isn't healthy as an organization or as a human, you're not going anywhere very fast. Organizations that don't prioritize the heart of their business, they don't survive. They definitely don't thrive, and they'll struggle to survive, which is something that we absolutely don't want to happen. Moving on to the next slide, I'm going to whiz through these things because I want to get to the juicy stuff. So employee engagement is a term that's bandied around so much, and it's become a bit of a minefield. I think it's really important that we keep things simple. That's how my brain works. And defining employee engagement, we say that there's 3 levels, and the aim is to take everyone from the bottom in the red right up to the top in the green. So if we start with the bottom, these are your actively disengaged employees. They are unhappy at work. They're really conscious of making sure that people know that they're unhappy, and they're actually undermining what their co-workers have accomplished. This isn't necessarily that they're bad people. It's just that they are not enjoying what they're doing, and so they're not putting much effort into it. Obviously, we don't want many of them or any of them in our organizations. Moving into the middle, the yellow folk. So that's disengaged workers. They've essentially checked out. So they're doing what they need to do. They're kind of doing what's expected of them, but they're not doing any more. They are kind of going through the motions. They're sleepwalking through their work, but they've not got any energy. They're not putting any passion into their work. They quite often can get dragged down by the people in the red. So they're doing the work generally when the boss is around.
So Simon was talking about trying to employ kind, happy people, for want of a better term, as part of the how they fit in with the team. Can it be that the grumpy people can slide into the highly disengaged quite quickly just with their outlook? Or
yeah, absolutely.
I don't know.
Very much so. So you've got that's where culture is really important, because if you've got a strong group in the green at the top, you want them to be drawing the yellow group up into the green, rather than the red group drawing them back down.
And if you're spotting people in the red group, might you have to do drastic things because you might have a couple of rotten apples in the cart?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting. So part of the process that we take organizations through is actually giving everybody the opportunity at every stage, whether they're green, yellow or red, to get really clear on what the organization is trying to do, what their role is in that. Some people step away. They're like, do you know what? I'm not interested in this. Is not what I'm here for. I don't want to get behind that. And as a leader, that's better for you to know, because if they've got no interest in helping you grow your business, do you want them there? And so there can be some uncomfortable conversations, but I think that it's important to have those conversations rather than the ostrich effect, which is what I'll talk about shortly. So both of those groups, the yellow and the red, they are emotionally disconnected. They are not emotionally invested in their organization. The green at the top. So these are emotionally invested, focused on creating value. They want to get involved. They're committed. They're loyal. They want to contribute. They're always trying to find new ways of working. They want the growth. They want to bring you revenue. They're highly engaged. They're coming up with new stuff the whole lifetime. They're bringing in new customers. And they've got this passion. And I think most people can kind of think about people, when I talk about this, but they feel this connection to their company, and they love what they do, and they want to help the organization move forward. And so obviously we want as many people in the green as possible. So what does that look like if we've got lots of people and we've managed to move people into the green? If we can just move on, Sam, that'd be great. So this is what it looks like when things are going well. So the benefits of employee engagement are massive to an organization. It's not just about having happy employees. That is a benefit in itself, but you get higher profitability, productivity, sales, customer metrics. These are just a few. But unfortunately, because employee engagement is still quite often neglected because we're focusing on the brain so much and we neglect the heart, on the next slide, there's a list of some of the things that we see too much too often. So lack of collaboration, silo working, absenteeism, presenteeism, weak relationships, a them and us culture. I won't go through them all, but there's that, not a sense of belonging. There's lack of accountability, people feeling undervalued, overwhelmed, not much innovation going on. And I think quite often in these scenarios, the leader feels like they're having to pretty much do everything themselves, which is a really hard place to be, because you're paying people and you're making a massive investment. But when it feels like it's just a handful of you really trying to drive that growth and help power the business on to succeed, it can be quite soul destroying. A way that I talk about organizations and high performing teams a lot is the boat analogy. So you can skip on to the next slide. So if you can imagine that your company is a boat. So if it's a high performing team, actually, I'm going to ask you that question, everybody. What do you think a high performing team looks like? What characteristics do you think a high performing team has?
A shared vision.
Yep, teamwork, communication, working together. Oh, good. They can do more. Yes, love that. They can do more together than they can apart. That's exactly that. Teamwork, vision, motivation. Yeah, this is all awesome. So if you imagine a team on a boat, they know exactly where they're trying to get to. They work together to get there. They've got a common goal. They love what they're doing. They're rowing hard, but they're enjoying it. Everybody knows who needs to do what, and they do it. So they work together really well. They're talking to each other the whole time. I talk a lot about having leaders at every level, and I know you guys discussed this briefly about it's not right that everyone should try and be managers, but I don't see leadership as a hierarchical thing. So every single person in the organisation is a leader, and they've got a role to play in helping the organisation achieve its vision. So they're working together to see how they can improve. I think kind of moving away from the boat analogy, my idea of an engaged team is people that come into work on a Monday, like pumped. They're motivated for the weeks ahead. They finish on a Friday, if that's their working week, satisfied with the job well done. And I think if you've got a group of people that are doing that, then that's gold dust, because they want to go above and beyond. And I'm not talking about working ridiculous hours, but they're thinking about how they can do things better. They're thinking about how things can improve. And they get more out of it than just a pay packet, which I think is things have changed and people are looking for more. They're looking for belonging. They're looking for purpose. So just skipping on to the next slide. So based on what we've talked about up till now, the sad thing is, the tragic thing is that the Gallup research from last year, the UK workforce, there's only 9% of the UK workforce are actually engaged in their work and engaged in their company, which means you've got 9%. I know it's terrifying, but it means you've got 9% of your people rowing really hard. Again, if and I'm sure it's different for different organisations, we'll talk about that. 9% rowing, 9% people really working hard to help you hit your KPIs, hit your targets, succeed in your mission. My maths is terrible, but it's like 60-something% just kind of taking up the space on the boat, looking at the view, weighing the boat down, and the rest, I think around 20%, are sticking their oars in, so slowing the boat down. So if you think about the growth of your business, you've got all these people from the yellow and the red not actually kind of helping you drive, steer your boat. So it is like driving with the handbrake on if we move from boats to cars. My analogies get a little bit mixed up. And a lot of people say, oh, yeah, no, my business isn't like that, though. And I'd say, OK, well, is that definitely true? Do you know that to be the case? Have you surveyed your people? So we can talk about that really quickly in a little bit. But moving on to the next slide, the even more scary thing is that for every disengaged employee, you're losing 34% of their salary. So that's just money that is going out the window. So when we talk about investing in employee engagement, it's kind of it's scary not to, because if they are disengaged and you're not trying to engage them, you're not moving them to the green group, then you are losing money through them. And again, that's a Gallup stat which I can provide a resource for. That's a lot of money. I'm not going to do the sums now. Those of you that have heard me speak before know that my maths always goes terribly wrong. But, you know, if you've got somebody on 100k, you're losing 34k of that straight away. That's maths I can do, but I'll leave it there.
That's
So
a staggeringly large amount of money, isn't it?
It's terrifying. Yeah.
And that's, I suppose there's also the potential reputational damage that they can cause to your business as well. Because if they're under delivering on projects or late on projects or grumpy with clients, then
massively.
I'd have thought that 34% for the Reds could even be higher.
Yep. What's the quote? And I can't remember who it is. You know, your customers won't be happy until your employees are. And I stand by that, because they are, you know, they're the face of your organization. And equally, when you're trying to recruit, if you've got very unhappy employees or ex-employees, you know, they are your brand ambassadors, whether you want them to be or not. And that they're the ones that people will listen to.
Yeah.
So just moving on to the next slide. FOFO, and I very nearly say that wrong, and it comes out as a very different word. The fear of finding out. So you can't expect to improve what you don't know. If you don't know where you're at now, you don't know where to get to. So leaders are really good at sticking their heads in the sand when it comes to people. They don't want to ask what people think, because they don't really know. They don't want to know the bad news. And this is a really bad idea. And we are all guilty of it. We don't go to the doctor about something because we don't want to hear the news. We don't want to look at our bank balance. But it is a silent killer. And you're avoiding the elephant in the room. And by doing so, you're avoiding that far easier path to growth and success, because it can be uncomfortable asking the questions that you need to ask, and it can be hard, but not as hard as leaving things unsaid. So as Simon was talking about before, ask questions, truly listen. And you can smell the air as well, like start impromptu conversations, look out for those kind of golden nuggets of intelligence. Run a survey. That's something that we can help with, to get to the heart of how people are really feeling. And that's going to, you know, a good survey will take a few minutes for employees to complete at the most, but it kind of lays out exactly where you're at. But the other thing is getting people in the room, asking them, you know, what are we trying to do here? What would you do if you were CEO? What would you do differently? What's holding us back as a business? They have, you know, if you've recruited well, even if you haven't, they'll have things to say, and it will be really, really powerful. You've got to make sure you create that kind of safe environment for people to be able to. I've put up here my engager's gone a bit wonky, but this is the employee journey, and something that we help organisations with is kind of really focus on that employee experience the whole way through. And I suggest that you really look at those different stages. So where are the problems? Are candidates saying yes to jobs but then pulling out before they start? If so, are you starting to engage them early enough? Quite often companies only start really trying to win them over once they start on day one. Send them something. Send them a video, send them a little pot plant if they're going to work from home a bit. Little things like that make people arrive on their first day like, this is the place that I'm going to be at. This, you know, I'm really excited, rather than I've got no idea what I'm, you know, getting into. Another kind of pain point can be that people leave quite quickly afterwards. Again, you've got to start that engagement really, really early on. What's your onboarding like? What's that process like? Exit interviews. Not enough organisations do these. Why are people leaving? Are they going to leave slagging you off, or are they going to leave, you know, being great brand ambassadors? So really thinking about those different stages of the employee journey and creating that brilliant experience. And it doesn't need to be really complicated. Those little moments that matter are absolutely crucial. And businesses of any size can do that. It doesn't take a lot of budget. It's thinking, you know, what would I want as a person? Moving on to the next slide. I'm very conscious of time, so I'm going to rush through this. Co-creation. So you guys touched on it very briefly earlier about getting that input from people. So this is a leadership approach that Lord Nelson was really good at. He knew that he couldn't be out on the seas. So he used to say to his captains, right, this is the main objective. You guys have got to decide what to do between you, because you know better than I do. And that, you know, the what goes down, the how comes up is a quote that I live by. It's woefully underused, this leadership approach. The military are brilliant at it. They call it mission command, you know, so when they're out, everyone knows exactly what they need to do, and they're coming up with ideas. They have to think on their feet the whole time. They can't rely on their leader to tell them what to do. Organizations don't tap into this enough. And if you go with that co-creation of what we're trying to do with the business, whatever question it is, whatever challenge you're tackling, whatever change you're trying to make, then they have ownership. They feel empowered. they're taking, as I say, they're taking ownership of stuff rather than just being told what to do, rather than being recipients. They're behind it because it's part, you know, they've partly come up with the ideas, which makes it's a massive shift having that empowerment. What else? Next up is your purpose. So SMEs and innovation have got a massive advantage that they've normally got a really clear purpose of why you're here. You've identified a problem and you exist to fix it. And that's something that you should shout about to your people, because it's something that you want to get people behind. And it is something that people can get behind. It's something that they can be proud of. I feel like that's quite a wasted opportunities because companies don't make enough of it, I don't think. There's loads of stuff out there about power of purpose. But I think it can be a bit scary for leaders because they're like, well, it can change, and that is fine. So just as the same as for humans, our purpose evolves as we age, as you know, as we go through different periods of our lives. Your organization's purpose will evolve as it grows as well. It's like very few of us have a clear purpose from kind of the day we were born until the day we die, and it's exactly the same as organizations. So I'd say kind of don't worry about it too much, but try and find something that you can really latch onto, and again, speak to your team about it. Like, why are we here? What are we trying to do? And the kind of the brainstorming, that group collaboration will come up with some really cool stuff. So I'd say that's a really good starting point for that. And moving on to the next slide, you touched on this earlier. I am a massive behaviors. Values. Every company has values, quite often on the wall, on the website, in the handbook, but they don't really go much further because they're quite intangible. Employees very rarely remember what their company's values are. So it's quite hard to see whether people are following them or not. Whereas behaviors are very different. They're tangible. They're how we do things, and you can measure behaviors. It's really hard to measure values. Again, going back to what I said at the start, if behavior changes, your organization changes, and there's no getting away from that. So it's something about focusing on what the desired behaviors are, but also making sure, like, are we living them? And that's got to be a regular, consistent thing, checking in every week. Who has demonstrated those behaviors this week? Bob has, because he did this. And it sounds silly, but it's those little things like that, getting that into, it's almost like building the behavior muscle. It's like going to the gym. If you go once, it's not going to make any difference. But if you're constantly kind of working at it, say like 3-4 times a week, you're constantly checking in, you're going to start seeing some progress. And it's exactly the same with living out these behaviors. So getting that consistency.
And you know
is
that
really important.
So quick question on that, Rachel. So is it that you should be encouraging anybody, well, you need to be encouraging everybody in the organization to be looking at who's doing those behaviors and not to report it, but to advertise the fact that, yeah, John did a fantastic job on that. You know,
100%.
the way that he dealt with the client was so friendly. The client was completely engaged with what we were doing. So it's not just from the leaders down, it's the whole organization supporting one another.
It's a really good point. I think it's a really common misconception that when we talk about reward and recognition, it needs to be financial. And actually, even if people say, I want more money, it's because they're feeling undervalued. It's because they're feeling unrecognized. And you get more emotional attachment to an organization where you get a thank you than you do where you get money, if that makes sense. Obviously, we all need to make sure that we can pay for our bills and everything. But having that recognition by your peers is massively powerful. And that's something that, again, any organization can do. It costs nothing. But if you start recognizing behaviors and not just results, but also encouraging peers to recognize each other, it could be something as simple as having a wall of fame, whether that's digital or if you're in the office, where people can write, Bob did a great job last week because we had a tricky thing with a customer and he overcame this and he made sure everyone knew what, like thank you notes, well done to colleagues. Getting that recognition from each other is hugely powerful. And that also other people are seeing it in action, and that will encourage them to behave in that way as well. So it's kind of a bit of a win-win situation, and it doesn't cost a thing, which I like. I like things that don't cost anything.
Got about 5 minutes, Rachel.
Super. We'll have plenty of time. That's good. I've speeded through more than I thought we would. Next one up is crafting your story. So this ties in with what Simon was talking about last week earlier around EVP, employer brand. My history, my background is in communications, is in narrative and organizational stories, and having that narrative of like one side of paper that tells the organization's story. So your past, your present, your future, it becomes your Northern Star. And it will save you so much time, because it's essentially setting out your entire employee experience, all your internal comms, all your candidate comms, all your leadership comms, that everything comes from that. I've put a few of the things on the slide. So it talks about your USPs as an employer. It will talk about your backstory, what you're trying to achieve, the company that you're working towards becoming, what people can expect working from you, with you, what you expect people working, what you can expect from people. So people can get this line of sight between their own role and their company's mission, and the company's mission, and also kind of seeing what's ahead of them. And that will get them on board. It gives them a really strong sense of purpose, a really strong sense of belonging. It motivates them to work really hard as the organization grows. They want to be part of that. They want to give their best. And again, it goes back to that consistency. You're not starting from scratch every time you need to think about communicating, which means that it saves you loads of time, which means it saves you loads of money.
And again, you get people to contribute to this. It's not a top down. It's just not by the person in their ivory tower saying this is what our story is. It's everybody in the company at the time that you do it. Is it?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, completely agree. So it goes back to that co-creation. If they're being told a story that they've got if they're recipients of a story, it's very different to them helping build that story.
Yeah.
So the more you can get your employees engaged and with this, from asking those questions, doing those workshops, why are we here? Why do we exist? What are we trying to achieve? They're coming up with ideas the whole time. They're buying into it, rather than just kind of receiving some fancy communications at the end of the process, which quite frankly is the norm. And you're kind of missing out on a trick here, because also it means that you're not having to do it all yourself. It shouldn't sit with leadership. It should sit with the whole team, the whole organization, to help pull that all together. So that co-creation thing, I think, is super important. And this counts whether it's one of you, three of you, 200 of you, 2,000 of you. Kind of, you need to communicate, even if there's three of you. I think it's really easy to not communicate when you're small, because you can think, oh, we don't need to. You really do need to. Just the assumption that people know what's going on, especially in this hybrid world, it's really, really important that you're constantly communicating. And the beauty of it being a small organization is that it's really easy to get people involved. And that's where the best ideas come. That's where they're coming up with new goals and the new vision and the mission. And if they're building something themselves, let's say they've got that ownership. So it's like you've created, I was about to say you created a baby together, which is not one of the but like they feel like it's theirs as well, maybe a puppy instead of a baby. But also you've you can use it for your candidate communications as well, because and please don't ask me to quote where I got this from, because I don't know, but I read recently that if you talk about your culture in your job ads, you get 70 more clicks or something on your job ad, something like that. But like, talking about your culture, talking about your company, rather than just these are your responsibilities, this is what you'll get. But talking about the culture, talking about what you're trying to do and the type of people that work there, and the behaviors and all that sort of thing, you're going to get far more interest in your job ads, I think. But Simon might disagree with me. But again, it's getting the fundamentals down. Start small, just start building on it, but do just make a start. I'm a big fan of kind of incremental steps, 1% better, and if you keep on taking 1% every single day.
I think it's very easy for certainly smaller companies that may be owner managed, that they work continuously in their business, and it is all about where's the next deal, let's get that out the door, where's chase the money, get that in, do this, do that. It's transactional, whereas it's making them realize that they need to spend time for both them and their employees to work on their business, which is really, really important. And this is just one of the areas where they could focus by working on their business. And as you've clearly said, the the financial benefit of actually having more people in the green is a bit of a no-brainer. And I know that's initially that's going to be quite an intangible thing for people to grasp. As well, how are you going to measure this? But once they start working on their business, getting people engaged, they will see the benefits come through the business, and they'll say that's why we have to work on the business, not just in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we actually have a lot of I said, large majority of leaders that come to us, it's because they're like, I need to be more strategic, but I'm not getting the opportunity to, because I'm constantly having to go back into the day-to-day. And so the work that we do is help their teams become more empowered so that the leader can start being more strategic by, the team working better together. So those gaps are filled and they're not having to kind of keep coming back in to do the firefighting, if that makes sense. That seems to be like a really common challenge that we're helping with at the moment.
Yeah. We're running a bit over time here, I'm afraid.
Yeah,
So,
no, that's all right. If you could just on the next slide, I won't go into this, but I will say this is essentially what high performing teams look like. If anybody wants to get in touch with me separately, I can do like a diagnostic with you to help you identify where your like big areas of focus are. So that's I'll leave that there. And then next slide, just a little recap of what we have talked about today. The survey thing, if anybody is interested in that, just drop me a line, and it's something that I can help set up, and I'll do it as a gift to you all for listening to me waffle on. And let's thank the lucky stars that my Wi-Fi didn't go. And then final slide is just my details at the end, if in case anybody does want to get in touch with me.
Yeah.
And thank you, everybody.
Well, absolutely fantastic, Rachel. Superb. It's like getting recruitment fit is also about getting the people in the right. It's that whole message about the people are your business, because without them you don't have a business. So I think both you and Simon are coming at it from different ways, and I'm sure Chris Hill at Vested will have his own slightly different approach to it all. But it's all about the team and getting them all in that same canoe, paddling in the same direction. And there's a great cartoon somewhere, because I'm so old, back in the 80s, and it's a canoe with 3 points on it and people paddling off in their own different directions, but it's all connected in the middle, and also they're going nowhere. But yeah, say getting them on the boat, engaged, enthused, all in traveling in the same direction. Absolutely fantastic. And people, please do take advantage of Rachel's offer for that questionnaire, I think you said. Details are here. We will be sending out these slides, so everybody's details will be shared on those as well. So no obvious questions from that. Rachel, thank you very much indeed. That was absolutely fantastic.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
And please stay around, don't disappear. Okay, thank you. Next up, we have Chris Hill. Oh, he's there already. There we are. How are we doing, Chris? You okay?
Yeah, I'm all good. Thankfully, what I'm going to talk about does segue nicely into what other people have talked about, which is always a good sign that I'm in the right place. So
okay, so you're going to be talking about sort of investment and share incentives, and kind of in some respects monetize. Not look, I can't think of the word, and getting people engaged in the business from not necessarily to tie them in, isn't it?
Yeah, it's about using equity to recruit and retain. So, as I say, it ties in. Well, what we'll go through is we'll talk about retention challenges, the power of equity, and then I'll just quickly delve into common types of equity just to give you a little bit more of an idea. But essentially, 6.5 million Brits are planning to resign in the next 12 months. The labour market's tight. We've touched on that already. The average cost of turnover per employee is over 30 grand. So what's the power of equity? So if we, it was talked about earlier on by Simon about differentiating yourself from your competitors when you're recruiting. More and more people are using equity, especially if they cannot afford to offer the top range salaries. They can offer some equity. When you talk about motivating and engaging teams, if you offer equity, over a period of time, it retains those key people. And it also has everyone working towards the same goal. because they know that the more work they put in, the more they help the company to grow, the more that their equity is going to be worth. So it's the ownership effect, basically. An employee who owns even a small fraction of equity in the business, they're more inclined to contribute to the success of that business. You know, an example from one of our customers, as soon as they announced the EMI scheme, they noticed company engagement and commitment grew higher. People are very positive, which, you know, directly mentions what Rachel was talking about, the employee engagement. So today's teams are different. You don't just have employees. You might have employees, you might have contractors, investors, non-exec directors, advisors. So it's all, there's different ways that you can offer equity to incentivize each one. So I mean, people use equity and share schemes for three main reasons: to recruit, to retain, to reward. So you recruit that person using equity, you retain them using equity, you all move towards the same goal, and then you reward them using the equity. So these are the main ways you've got. So cash investment, we're not going to touch on today. That's investors coming in. It could be SEIS, EIS, it could be family and friends, VCs, so on and so forth. We're going to talk about the non-cash investments. So this is typically what you would give employees or advisors or, you know, people you want to bring in. Growth shares, EMI scheme, unapproved options. So if we start on options to begin with.
And so with an employee, you might be covering this in a minute, Chris. Is this something you think, right, we need somebody quite senior in tech? Do you offer them the opportunity, say, once you've got, you know, 6 months down the line, this opportunity might be available to you? So you might offer it to begin with, but they need to prove their worth to the business and their fit and their cultural fit and how they operate. And then that triggers the start at, I don't know, the end of their, what kind of the timing and, I don't know, the timing of when you make that offer or allow it to happen and the level of person in the business, or is it equally applicable to everybody in the business?
You would tailor it for specific individuals. You don't just give equity away, because then obviously you've just given it away and they don't need to stay. So I mean, you give it with conditions, but it could be, you could be offering it to a key senior leadership team member to come in and drive the business sales, or an early stage employee who comes early and perhaps works for under what their position should be paid, but they have an equity stake in the business moving forward. Or, you know, we often see different methods for different levels. You could have a senior leadership scheme, you could have a middle management scheme, an employee scheme. And as I say, you know, you could do it over a number of years so that it works to retain. It could only, you know, they could only benefit on an exit event, for example. There's a variety of different things that you can offer. So, you know, if we start off on options, an option is the right to buy a share for a predetermined price at a predetermined point. So EMI is the most common. It's the UK government-backed scheme. It's over 14,000. I've got it. It's incredibly tax efficient, not just for the employee, but also for the business. So you get tax break if you give employees an EMI scheme. So, you know, options are granted instead of shares. An option is the right to buy a share. They don't have to, but they have the right to. Now, often you'll see the right could be when we sell the business, when we exit, or when the business reaches a certain value, that's when they have the right to buy it. But you cannot give someone something of value without there being a tax consequence. It's just a much more tax efficient way to do it. So the recipient has to meet the conditions. So in this example, you can see they get nothing in year one. Call that the probation period. And then as the years go, they start to benefit from the equity. If it's an exit only, that means they only benefit when the exit occurs. But to get that full value, they have to be there after 4 years or when you exit. And there's nothing to pay when the options are granted. So you're giving someone the right to shares at a point in the future. And as you say, you know, you make the conditions, you are still an employee here. So if they leave, they lose. You talk about retention. So with the EMI scheme, as I say, it's the British government one, there's certain criteria. You can't have assets of more than £30 million. you've got to have fewer than 250 full-time employees. You must have a permanent establishment in the UK. We've got an EMI eligibility quiz. It's all on the website, vested.com. There's lots of information there. Not all options are the same. So this is the EMI scheme. So let's say someone's come to one of your employees and said, I will give you £10,000 more to come and work for me. After tax, they might, and national insurance, they might get £5,000 of that. If you've given them £10,000 worth of EMI options, then what will happen is they get that £10,000. We'll call it £1 a share. You sell for £10, they get a £9 gain. They pay 10% capital gains tax on that. So they walk away with £8.10 per share. So they're paying 10% capital gains tax as opposed to their marginal rate of tax and also the national insurance. So from an employee standpoint, it's massively tax effective. But also the company can offset that £9 gain against their corporation tax. All of the costs of setting up and running an EMI scheme can be offset against corporation tax. So it's all 100% offsettable. So, you know, why wouldn't you? And, you know, you want those engaged employees. You want that, you want to offer equity in recruitment. You want to offer equity to your existing staff, you know, but you build in the conditions. So they only gain once they've, you know, after 5 years, for example, or when you exit, or when the business is valued at £5 million, or, you know, you build in what you want. Unapproved options are basically, you can't, you know, if you don't qualify for EMI, so if, for example, they're not a full-time employee or they're not in the UK, you can give unapproved options. The tax isn't as efficient, but again, it's a way to offer equity to build that in. They'll pay their marginal rate of tax. If they're outside the UK, they'll simply face their local tax consequence. If they are in the UK, they'll pay income tax, but they're not paying national insurance. It's still more tax efficient. There's no corporation tax offsets for an unapproved option because you have to be an employee. That's part of the approved option. So is there any questions on options?
Yeah, so we've got one just come through there, Chris. It's is there any sort of evidence to say that in the marketplace this is, because obviously the government thinks it's a great thing to do and they've worked with Treasury and HMRC to say, right, this is a scheme that we're going to employ. You know, are there many companies taking this up and is it working for them?
It's massively popular at the moment, and yes, essentially. You know, there's a lot of people taking up. We're continuing to grow. It's all about incentivizing your staff or getting that recruitment in. You know, if I use an example, one of the highest growth sectors we have is recruitment companies, because it's who you know, it's tying those high earners in. Fintech companies, you know, it's massive because people are used to working digitally, and we're a digital platform, and we give everyone a login so they can see what they have. So, you know, it's giving options, giving equity is hugely important. And, you know, I don't have the figures handy, but, you know, we've got everything on the website if you want to read through it about, you know, how much more attention there is given to when you're recruiting if you're offering equity. And, you know, the buy-in and retention for existing staff members is massive as well.
So it obviously works so it's retention for you, the employer. Mm-hmm. So you keep the best people and you're rewarding them, so you're saving on recruitment costs and training and all the rest of it, but then they get the employee gets the benefit down the road. So might you do it so there's a 5-year option which is then rolling, so they can buy shares today, but they realize the value in 5 years time, but the next year they buy another bunch of shares, so in a further a year after the 5 years, 6 years, 6.
Yeah, you can do that. So it's let's say we value the company today. So one of the steps for EMI, you have to have an HMRC approved valuation. So let's say we valued the company. We'll say you're valued at £1 million. You've got 1 million shares. It's £1 a share. Nice and simple. So you give me options at £1 a share for me to come and work for you. 5 years down the line, the company's worth £10 a share. part of my EMI option agreement means I still only need to pay £1 for those shares.
Yeah.
So, you know, why would I not pay that £1 per share to realise that full value? Or let's say it only happens at an exit. So part of my contract to come and work, so I'm recruited and you give me 10,000 options at £1 a share. 5 years down the line, the company sells for £10 a share. So that £10 comes to me. £1 is immediately taken off because I have to buy the option to turn it into a share. I'm left with a £9 gain. I pay 10% capital gains tax on that £9.
Yeah.
I walk away with £8.10 per share. I've got 10,000 shares. That's £81,000. The business can fully offset that £90,000 I just made against their corporation tax. It's the cost the company nothing because all of the costs to set up and run it are fully offset against their corporation tax. And you've got me, a fully motivated member of staff who's fully engaged because I know that all of my work, I will get a share of that at the end.
Cool.
So that's essentially the power of it.
Which is your example earlier on, isn't it? When it's in the scheme. Yeah. And when you say fully deductible for tax, that means that your fees are tucked inside the profit and loss as a cost to the business. So
the corporation tax, so any fees for paying EMI, so essentially if you were using vested, all of vested fees are fully offsettable against your corporation tax. That's part of the EMI tax wrap.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So EMI is one example. We'll quickly go to growth shares as well. Now, let's say I've started this business. My name is Stephanie. I've grown the business to be valued at £3 million. So I own 2/3 of the business and Ted owns 1/3. Now we want to bring in another member of staff to help the business grow. However, we've grown the business to this point, so this is ours. So what happens is you give a conditional growth share. So what that means is Jim has joined the business. Now a growth share is issued above the current value of the business. So this first £3 million is always Stephanie's and Ted's. Jim only shares above that. So again, if we change it from being the value to the value of the share, so you can see here what happens is Jim is issued with the growth shares above this £3 million mark. So the first £3 million always comes to Stephanie and Ted. Jim only shares above that. So as the business grows, Jim gains value in his shares. Now, the reason why you would issue the growth shares above that £3 million is you cannot give someone something of value without there being a tax consequence. If a business is valued at £1 million and I am given 10% of it, that's 100 grand's worth of stock. So the very first thing that happens is HMRC send a £45,000 tax bill. So that's typically something you want to avoid because that's not really incentivizing to retain your staff. So you issue above the current value. So the more the company grows, the more Jim gets. Again, Sarah joins, but she shares above the £5 million mark because you always issue growth shares in a worthless state so that there's no tax bill to be paid. So Stephanie and Ted own everything up to £3 million. They dilute slightly when Jim comes in. Jim shares between 3 million and 5 million. Sarah shares above £5 million. So each time you add someone to the growth shares, you're only diluting in the growth. Which is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Would you rather have 100% of £5 million, or would you rather have 80% of £10 million?
Yeah, absolutely. That's the whole argument about getting either equity investment or growth shares or EMI schemes, isn't it? It's better to have a smaller piece of pie, but a pie that's a lot bigger.
Yeah, essentially. Yeah. And the thing is, so if the company doesn't grow in size, these aren't worth anything.
Yeah.
Now,
so a question on the chat there is, what happens if instead of say you're a high growth company, but you instead of selling into the market, you have an MBO. How does that then realise the shares that you've now got an option on?
Yeah, so an exit event is classified as a significant change of control. So if I own, I'll use nice round numbers to help with my maths. If I own 10% in options, when that exit occurs, my 10% comes into being. So I become a 10% shareholder. Now, if I'm buying the company out, I'm not going to sell that 10%. I'm going to use that toward gaining control of the company. But an option will only exercise and become a share when the relevant conditions have been met, and the conditions are set by the business, whoever controls the business today. So if the plan is to get to an MBO, you set it up favourable to that.
Right. So one of the messages is, if you are thinking of this, you can't go into it light-hearted. You have to really plan and explore the potential end games to actually set up the right scheme for your company. So I think as one example might be, you decide partway through the growth of the business, you're going to acquire another company and have a holding co. As an example, that might upset the apple cart. But if you've talked about that at the beginning, then you can plan around that possible eventuality.
It's about the communication. You want the employee to be fully engaged and to be working towards, you want to work towards the same point. If the plan is in 10 years you want to sell the business, you want everyone working towards that same goal. And if they have a stake in that, if they have some skin in the game, they're going to be working towards that as well. So if you say to them, well, you get 10%, the plan is to sell at £10 million. They know that that's £1 million to them.
Yeah.
Or what happens if they really sort of, work harder and faster and smarter, and then they sell at 12 million instead? Well, hang on, they've just made themselves an extra £200,000. That's the whole point. They're working towards helping the entire business grow because it helps themselves.
Yeah. Okay. Please carry on with the growth share piece, Chris, because time's getting on.
No problem. Growth shares basically is 20% capital gains tax as opposed to the EMI, which is 10%. But you can give growth shares to anyone. There's EMI, there's eligibility criteria. So the next part, as I say, I'll just quickly work through this. Conditional growth shares. So you always issue them with conditions. We liken this to a prenup. So let's say Stephanie's the founder and she's offered 100,000 shares to Simon. All he needs to do is give 2 years of brilliant strategic support and advice. He's got no salary or retainer. So she gives him 100,000 shares straight away with no value. After 2 years, he's giving brilliant support. They're worth £1 a share. He sells his shares after the 3 years for £2 a share. So Simon's quids in. He's made £200,000. He will pay 20% capital gains tax. He walks away with £160,000. There is no income tax. It maximises the reward for Simon. However, the risk is if Simon doesn't deliver, if she's just given him 100,000 shares and Simon just walks away after day one, Simon still owns 100,000 shares. So you have to make sure that what is agreed is delivered. The alternative is Stephanie says, I'll give you the 100,000 after 2 years. So she gives him 100,000 shares after 2 years. Simon has to pay £45,000 in tax. He then sells them after 3 years. He then pays another £20,000 in tax. He's walking away with 135k. So he only gets the reward when Stephanie is satisfied. However, if Stephanie moves the goalposts, then his shares are in trouble. Or if he doesn't do what he's supposed to do, he gets less. It's difficult. So what we do is make it safe for both. So you issue this prenup. So what happens is the shares are issued today when there's no value in them, but they're held in digital escrow until the task is completed, which means Simon doesn't pay any tax, and he sells after 3 years and he gets his 200,000. So it minimises the risk for both, maximises the benefit for both. It's flexible by the mutual consent because you set it up initially. It's maximum transparency. So what that means is if Simon delivers everything, he gets this 100,000. if he doesn't deliver anything, he loses them all. If he only does half of the job, he only gets half of them. So it's all about setting it up in a safe way that protects both parties.
Okay, and again, that's something that you can work with. And is there an option to go to, like, Simon thinks he's done an ace job, but Stephanie doesn't? Is there a third party? I mean, do you invoke ACAS and say what is a fair and reasonable view of what's happened here? Because they might have fallen out. They might have been friends. They then fall out as friends. You know, never know what can happen. And so Stephanie's really got it in for him, or, you know.
It's when these are issued, there are conditions. So they have to be measurable, because you don't want to end up in a court case. So you can make it as tangible as time. After 5 years, these are yours. Or it could be, Chris, I'll give you 1,000 options if you bring in £1 million worth of business in the next 12 months. If you bring in between £750,000 and £1 million, you get 7,500 shares. Bring in 500 grand, 750, you get 5,000 shares. Like that. You can make it as simple as you want.
And is it part of your role then, Chris, is to and your team to work with the companies? Again, it's understanding, are they staff, are they external agencies who you're, individuals that you're wanting to engage with? And it's just getting everything out in the open and understanding the landscape, isn't it? And then your experience says, no, you don't want to do that because of A, B, and C. What you might want to consider is this instead, because that then gives you the options if you fall out, or if they do extra better, they get actually more of an uplift. You can work. Your whole role is to make sure that the structures that are put in place benefit both parties equitably, isn't it?
I mean, we're an FCA accredited business, so we're there to help organisations set this up. Our whole point is to make it as simple as possible. We only deal with equity and share schemes. We don't do anything else. So, the share schemes and equities is most of what we do, but also all the cap table management, investment management. So you can issue shares on the platform. We've got two-way integration with Companies House. But essentially, my role is I speak to founders and MDs and owners on a daily basis.
Yeah.
We talk through what is the situation they're in, what are they looking to get to, and then we offer, well, you could do this, you could do that. We will never offer commercial advice. We're not a law firm.
Yeah.
We will offer the full options, and we'll fully explain what the different things that they can do is. I see Harriet's asked, where's the evidence this works? On the website you've got lots of information from the government, all sorts of figures. What I would suggest is, rather than have a look on our website, have a look at the independent review sites. So G2 and Capterra are the two independent review sites that review tech platforms. So have a look at those, have a look at Vested, and it gives you lots and lots of examples that are completely independent and neutral. And then come and have a look at our website and see how we can help.
Yeah.
But you can have a free consultation call. That's not a problem. Just go on and book in with either myself or one of my team.
Yeah. And what size of company, or at what stage in their growth trajectory? I mean, this is like a really tricky question to answer, because you don't know what the industry is and what it is they're developing and time to realise the market opportunity. But should they be looking at this as they set the company up, or within the first 3 years they need to be thinking about this? I've got no idea.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mix. So, you can incorporate on the platform because we've got two integration with Companies House. So we have companies that are incorporating. So, I talked to a company this morning that had been in business for, being incorporated for about 20 minutes. And they're setting up equity for their first key employee. So, this person is going to come in and be their CTO. So they're setting up now. So if you set it up very early, then there's zero value in the company at that point. So it's much easier to do. But on the other end of the scale, we've got PLCs that use us to issue options to all their staff, because it's all managed in one place. So it's essentially Vested as a one-stop shop for the design, the execution, but crucially the ongoing management of share and equity schemes. So it can be incorporation, it can be PLCs, and everything in between.
Yeah. I imagine, for a small company of 10 people, what might be, this is again a tough question, a kind of ballparky number for setting this up, and then the annual fee?
So to
10
set up,
people, £1.5 million turnover, that sort of thing.
if you're looking at EMI, 10 recipients, it would be probably, with the 10% discount that you get from quoting this webinar, you'd be looking at about £3,500 for the first year.
Yeah.
Which you can fully offset against your corporation tax. And then depending on what you're doing moving forward, if you're just setting up in year one, you just want it to tick over, £50 a month. So £600 a year moving forward.
Okay, so really quite affordable then. It's not a huge burden. It's, yeah.
The whole point, Vested was set up to make this simpler and make it accessible to small businesses. Because before we came along, basically you would have to go to talk to both lawyers and an accountant, and they would have to create the legal documents and then do the valuations and everything. And so we say costs soon spiraled. Whereas, as I say, we do everything in-house.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, Chris, absolutely fascinating. I mean, I think this is a great way of retaining staff over a longer period of time. And as you say, that they get invested in it because they can, yes, they're getting their salary, so they're running their day-to-day lives, but they know if they go above and beyond and they know the team is incentivized to do the same, then the outcome in 5 years' time, 3 years' time can be a significant and maybe life-changing benefit to them.
Yeah, I mean, depending on the growth and depending on the amount of equity that's given, you often see a mix. So, a senior leadership team will have one, middle management will have another, and perhaps, it's a philosophical thing. Some people want to give everybody a stake of the company.
Yeah.
Some people just want to reward the key employees in the senior leadership team. So it's a personal decision.
Yeah. And we come to you and then you help us sort out what's the best way forward.
You can book directly into our diaries for a free consultation call.
Fantastic. Chris, thank you very much indeed. That's been amazing. And again, I didn't know much of that at all. I mean, I've been around these schemes a little bit, but that's been very, very focused. I've learned an awful lot about that. I'm sure the people on the workshop have. So thank you very much for your time.
No
Okay,
problem.
folks, we're going to have another short comfort break. I only want to go for it's 15:28. If we can be back at 22, that would be great. So just 10 minutes. We are just running 10 minutes behind time, which I'm quite comfortable with. So if we can be back, please, for 20 to 4. And then we've got Shakespeare's Rhys Wyburn talking about some of the employment law that you need to be just aware of as you take staff on, as you grow your business. And then we've got the CFO Centre coming on, last of all, Rachel Riding talking about the role of the non-exec. So how can I access that external help to give me that strategic focus and direction for the business? So yeah, look forward to seeing you all in 10 minutes or so. Thank you very much. Well, welcome back, everybody. I think I might even be a minute ahead of time, even the fact that we're only 9 minutes late now. So that's an improvement. You about ready for this one, Reese?
Let me unmute myself. Yeah, absolutely. Let me share my screen.
So welcome back, everybody. So Reese is a partner over at Shakespeare Martineau, our headline sponsor for the Innovation Challenge. And Reese is going to be covering off all around employment contracts and touching on the law, I think, around it, aren't you, Reese?
That's right. Yeah. Can you see that? See the slides?
Yeah,
Perfect.
absolutely super.
Yeah. So thanks for having me, Sam. So yeah, delighted to be here. So as Sam mentions, I'm one of the partners here at Shakespeare Martineau, and we're a firm that provides full legal services to all sorts of businesses in different shapes and sizes. And my area of specialism is employment. So this workshop is sort of very close to my heart. I work with people and their staff issues, day in, day out. So yeah, it's been really good to hear some of the interesting talks so far. So what I'm going to look to cover is really the key fundamentals when you're taking on staff, and that's the different type of working arrangements you can put in place, the contractual requirements that you should put in to govern those relationships, and then some of the legal implications if you don't do that, and ultimately where you can get yourselves into some difficulties and potential tribunal claims in not following those things through correctly. So to kick things off, you would think that we've heard all about the sort of recruitment issues and retaining people. And so getting good staff is a very challenging issue at the moment. But then once you've done so, you would think that the rights and terms that they receive once you've engaged somebody will be really clear and, one of the most straightforward things to put in place. But actually, you only have to look at all the cases that have been in the press of late, in the likes of Uber, Pimlico Plumbers, Deliveroo, employment status, and looking at whether somebody is an employee, a self-employed contractor, a worker, a 0 hours person, takes up such a huge amount of tribunal time because the law is so complicated, the tests are relatively unclear, and therefore there's lots of litigation where individuals are seeking to clarify whether or not they're employed as a particular type of status. And it's important. So I'm hoping today to shed some light on what the different types of arrangement are, then also, as I say, to look at some of the contractual issues that you should look at putting in place once you've done so. So starting off, the sort of most gold-plated rights that you have are as an employee. And there are different types of employment, but the key things in looking at if you're employed under a contract of employment are that you get rights for things like unfair dismissal protection. So once you've been with a business for 2 years or more, you have the right not to be unfairly dismissed. Likewise, you will also qualify for redundancy entitlement. You have rights in respect of holidays, sick pay. So you just have the full suite of rights when you're employed as a proper employee. And there are different ways of being engaged on that basis. The most typical is a full-time employment contract, where you're employed to carry out a role over a sort of full-time 5-day-a-week basis. And then there are terms and conditions put in place that deal with those duties and your obligations where you work as carrying out those roles as a full-time employee. And I'll come on to look at those contractual matters shortly. Sticking to the employee status, you've then got part-time employees who, again, have the same suite of protection, so the full rights to unfair dismissal, redundancy, etc., but they just work on a reduced basis. Now, just be wary where you have part-time employees. They have specific protection, so they can't be treated less favourably in comparison to their full-time counterparts, purely because of their part-time status. There are some specific regulations that were brought in to give part-time individuals a specific right of action where they're not receiving pro rata equivalents to things like benefits, pay, holidays by virtue of being part-time. Or, for example, if they're overlooked for promotion in comparison to a full-time employee, again, you can find yourself facing challenge under the part-time worker regulations. Next, and there's a big scrutiny at the moment, is on 0 hours. Now, the sort of second category of status, where you don't quite have the full suite of rights that you have as an employee, is this kind of grey area of what's called worker status. And this is where lots of the case law and litigation has been, really, to say, is somebody a fully fledged employee? If not, are they a self-employed contractor where they have basically zero rights? Or do they fall in this middle ground where they're classed as a worker? So they've got to provide personal services and they're not a full-blown employee. There's more flexibility, but they're not engaged in business on their own account as a kind of consultant on a self-employed basis. And 0 hours workers tend to be sort of stopping short of employee status, so they don't benefit from things like, say, the unfair dismissal and redundancy protection, and they're often used as kind of backup, a sort of bank of individuals you can call on in sort of situations of peak demand to come in and help out your existing workforce in looking to, you know, not commit to any particular number of hours, but to call on them as and when needed to fill a need in terms of your requirements. So there's much more control for you as the employer. The employee can't be guaranteed any hours, and they're only paid for the time that they are actually working for you. Now, there used to be some employers that would say, well, look, we're not going to commit to any hours for you. We're going to only take you on this 0 hours basis, but we only want you to make yourself available to us. So they had these exclusivity arrangements where they would say, look, even though we're not going to give you a guaranteed 10 or 15 hours a week, we're just going to call on you as and when needed. You've got to make yourself available for us, and you can't go and work for other companies, you know, to fill your time and to you know, have that income. Now, 5 years ago, that was sort of ruled as incompatible and unfair to those 0 hours workers. So there is now a ban on exclusivity clauses. So if you're engaging 0 hours workers, they have to be free to be able to go and work elsewhere. You can't have that monopoly on them where you're not giving them a set amount of hours. And it's worth highlighting that the government still have 0 hours very much in their focus in terms of consultation, because they recognise that it's very difficult for individuals to be, you know, working on this basis where they don't have any guaranteed number of hours and therefore guaranteed income in terms of the expectation of them. So there's been all sorts of consultation recommendations to say after a certain period of time, they should be able to call on the employer to be given a sort of minimum guaranteed number of hours. There should be more flexibility in their contractual arrangements. So watch this space for more provisions to come in around protections for 0 hours workers. But at the moment, they're the sort of key issues to think about.
Got a question there, Reese.
Yeah, of course.
A couple of things. If I get taken on part-time, I become full-time. Is that all continuous service, even though I've signed a different contract?
Yeah,
it is.
Yeah, so as long as there's no gap and there's no sort of break in continuity where you go off and do something else and then come back on that sort of full-time basis, if it's just a seamless transition, absolutely, all your continuity carries on from day one in that role.
And what about 0 hours? If I'm on a 0 hour contract for 2 years, then I become employed. Am I therefore already got 2 years in the bag, or?
No, so again, it depends on the basis on which you're engaged as a 0 hours individual. Because I say, as mentioned on that slide, it can be an employee arrangement where the company wants more control over how you carry out those services. So if you're employed under a kind of umbrella contract to say, we're going to call on you as and when we need, but there are employment obligations on you under this contract, then yes, that would then provide service for which you would then continue to accrue in your new role. If you were a worker and not meeting that employment status, that wouldn't count. And when you became a permanent employee, you would start from day one. Okay, which is why these kind of questions, Sam, are why there are so many of these challenges in the tribunal system, because there are these sorts of, say, grey areas which individuals try and play the system to say, well, that 6 months I did as a worker, actually, I was doing more than just a worker status. I was an employee, and therefore I should have the further protection.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that.
Okay. So that sort of employees and workers. You've then got agency workers. So again, you know, often in busy periods, you'll go to an employment agency and you'll have additional workforce provision to help you in terms of your requirements. And that's normally this triangular arrangement where you've got the employment business, the agency, who provides the individual to you to provide the services, and then the client as the end user as to who's receiving those services. And you would normally have a contract of employment between the agency and the individual, and then just a sort of contract between the agency and the client as to how those individuals are going to carry out their services. It's unlikely that they would become an employee of the client unless there are specific arrangements put in place to do so. So you shouldn't owe effectively employment rights and obligations to those agency staff. That should be the requirement of the agency who provides them. But again, just be aware there are sort of legal issues that sort of surround the use of agency workers, particularly around if you have placements of 12 weeks or more. You then have to look at making sure the terms that those agency workers are receiving are on a comparable level to effectively what would be the permanent employee equivalent of that type of role. So you can't have this sort of staggered workforce after that 12-week requirement. And then the other issue is giving them rights to things like vacancies, use of communal facilities from day one. An agency worker shouldn't be put at that detriment in comparison to your directly employed staff. So again, just be mindful of not falling into potential issues with the use of agency workers, because there are certain protections that they still have, even though they're not your direct employees.
Are you going to cover off at all or touch on IR35?
I am, yeah, that will be something I touch very briefly on because it could be a topic in its own right. But yeah, no, bear with me, Sam, that's
cool.
an important
Lovely.
issue. So it falls into this actually, although I'm going to cover the kind of contractual aspect in another slide. So if you're not an employee, you're not a worker, and you're not an agency worker, then you're likely going to be engaged on a self-employed basis. So you'll tend to be a consultant. Now that can either be on an individual basis, so you're taken on as an individual contractor to provide services, or what we see more and more, and where IR35 comes into the question, is if you provide your services through a personal service company. So if Sam were to set up Sam Stevens Limited and to provide himself as the individual through that service company to provide services, then that's when this big tax question comes up around, is it just a ruse to get around being treated as an employee? Where actually, if you take Sam Stevens Limited out of the equation, the way the work is being performed is effectively an employment arrangement. He's working, regular hours, only for this company. He's control, the company has control over how he's providing the services. It can only be Sam. It can't be anybody else. You can't provide a substitute to give, to do the services. They're the sorts of considerations that HMRC, from a tax perspective, and IR35 is only a question about tax, will look at to say, is that being treated in the right way? So I'll come back to that when we look at some of the contractual matters shortly. But yes, self-employment is great in the sense of if somebody's in business on their own account and they're working with lots of different companies in providing various services, then absolutely you can be engaged on this self-employed basis. But it is something that, I say, the courts are looking at more stringently, particularly HMRC, to make sure that they are recouping the right taxes in terms of those services and how they're being carried out. So that sort of sets the scene in terms of the type of arrangements that you can have when you start engaging individuals to carry out work for you. I guess then the important area is how you go about documenting those. And for us in defending our clients when we get to contentious issues in the employment tribunal, having a good framework and a good contract of employment that sets out all the key obligations, which if you're going to discipline somebody for, to say you've breached a fundamental term of your employment contract, helps that paper trail to convince the tribunal that you've taken the right and proper action. It's a fundamental part of having that proper defence and being able to manage these issues correctly. So the contract of employment is a key and fundamental document, and it sets out all the kind of key terms and conditions of how you're engaging that individual. Now, some contracts can be very short and sweet. Others can be chapter and verse and can run on for pages on end in terms of the benefits, the bonus arrangements, etc., etc. So what are the sort of legal requirements for you in terms of taking on staff? Well, the key part is under what's called Section 1 of the Employment Rights Act, which is where these obligations are set out. There is a sort of minimum tick list that you have to give to employees when you first take them on. And it used to be that you had 2 months to do that. So you had this sort of period of grace within 2 months to issue this contract, which ticked these boxes under Section 1 of the Employment Rights Act. Now, back in 2020, there was this good work plan consultation about standards and transparency in the workplace that the government carried out. And one of the recommendations that came of that, which was enacted into law, was this good work plan, where now that you have to issue this contract from day one. So no longer do you have this 2-month period of grace. It has to be something that you give your recruit immediately on day one. And often it's part of the offer letter signed before they'll start with you. But if not, on day one, they have to have received their contract of employment. And as I say, it must tick those minimum boxes. And it's things like the names of the parties, their start date, the date of continuity of service, pay, holiday pay, sickness, the key fundamentals of their employment obligations. Now, things that aren't included in that sort of mandatory list are things like confidentiality, intellectual property, post-termination restrictions, as I've mentioned on the slide. They're sort of additional options for you to think about, depending on seniority, risk to the business, protections you want, depending on the type of role that you're taking on. So there's a set of mandatory list of terms that you've got to set out from day one. And if you don't, I'll come on to what the potential consequences are shortly. But then think about, actually, do you want to go over and above that, particularly for your management level employees who could cause you some significant difficulty if they go elsewhere? Do you want to put strict confidentiality terms in place and really post-termination restrictions? So if they go to a competitor, you can put some protection in place for up to 12 months, depending on, as I say, the seniority. Can't really go above 12 months, where it causes them some limitation in terms of being able to compete with you after they leave your employment.
And can you, during, as somebody grows in your business and they get promotion, can you change the contract as they go along, saying, you were on 3 months, now you're on 6 months because you're in a more senior position? And
yeah, you can and you should, Sam, is the sort of easiest answer there. If you're changing roles and it's then going to be, say, becoming more senior, that they're going up the promotion ladder, then with that comes the expectation for the additional salary and package they're receiving, that they'll be giving more protection back to the business. So, and actually, particularly on the restrictions side of things, what a court will look at, because the starting point with restrictions is they're not worth the paper they're written on. They're sort of trying to stop people earning a living, so they're called what's referred to as being in restraint of trade. Now, the only way they can be enforced is if you go to a court and say, well, look, these are carefully drafted. They go no further than we need to protect our legitimate business interests, and therefore these should be enforced to give us this protection. This person's left, they're within their 6-month or 12-month period of restriction. They're clearly competing with us. They're trying to poach our people and our customers. We're going to suffer £50,000 worth of lost revenue, and therefore we want this protection. And if the court agrees that they are carefully drafted, they don't go too far to stop the person being able to earn a living, then they certainly can give you protection. And we're seeing more and more cases where the sort of pendulum is swinging back in favour of the employer, where these restrictions are being enforced. But that's all part and parcel of keeping them under review. If you've just got a boilerplate standard set of restrictions that you give to everybody from day one, but you don't update them as they move up the ladder, they are going to be big arguments that will go against you in terms of enforceability. Yeah. So absolutely keep them under review. And the final part on the slide there, which we're seeing more and more, with employers again offering more than just salary and benefits in terms of trying to retain people. Often it's offering training and development of careers, which again is a big attraction for employees joining a business. So again, if you're going to offer that, think about putting terms in place where if you're investing in people only for them to take that training and go and use it to join a competitor and to potentially, further their career elsewhere, then have you got some clawback to be able to bring those costs back that you've invested in those individuals? And again, provided you tailor them down, so if they leave over a period of time, there's a sliding scale of what they have to repay. Courts are willing to enforce these provisions in terms of recovering these training costs. So the other area in contracts of employment that we get often questions about is, do you have a probationary period or not? How necessary is it to have a probationary period? Legally, you don't have to. It's not one of those mandatory requirements that has to be included in an employment contract, but it's good sense. It kind of gives you it can be 3 months, 6 months with the right to extend it, sort of factored into the contract. That period of time for both parties, it goes to be said, to assess whether or not the role's suitable, whether they enjoy the workplace, the culture, and if not, there's usually a shorter period of notice to end that contract in the probationary period than outside of it. If you have a probationary period, keep it under review. Don't let it lapse without getting round to your end of probationary period meeting, because if you get to that point and the period has already kind of expired and you think, oh, crikey, we didn't get round to having this meeting and they haven't really convinced us we could do with extending that for another 3-6 months, it'll be a case of tough luck. That sort of implied letting that period lapse will then make them a sort of outside of their probation. It'll be completed, and then the default notice, whether it be a month, 3 months, whatever your notice terms are, will effectively then come into play. So if you're going to have a probationary period, review them and make sure that they're kept under review. It isn't necessarily the be all and end all. As I say, you have in the first 2 years a bit more flexibility to be able to move somebody on if you don't think necessarily that they've performed to the standard that you were kind of expecting or that you require, because it's very difficult for somebody to bring a claim to say that that dismissal was unfair in the first 2 years of their employment. They only have that right after 2 years. There are some exceptions, which I'll come on to, but in a general sense, you do have that safety net in the first 2 years of employment. We've heard some of the other speakers talking about home working and hybrid issues, and Sam mentioned it himself in terms of it is very much becoming the more sort of traditional way that employers are putting roles available. It's more attractive to potential candidates, and flexible working is a huge issue for employers. So if you're going to have those offerings, what are the terms that apply, particularly around data security and GDPR? Just because somebody's working from home, you still as the employer are responsible for that data. And so you've got to make sure you have the right controls and measures in place so as not to fall foul of potential challenges with the Information Commissioner's Office and potential data protection issues. So yeah, think about how that works and what rights do you have to kind of call the person back into the office in the event, you feel that home working and hybrid working isn't working. And a topical issue at the moment is all around sort of bank holidays. And obviously, we've got an extra one coming up next weekend with the King's coronation. So how do you deal with that in the employment contract? Is it automatic that staff have to have the extra day off? And again, it comes down to how your contracts are drafted. If you have a clause in there that says you're entitled to 20 days holiday plus any and all bank holidays in the UK, then clearly this will be another bank holiday, and therefore it would be a day that they would be entitled to. If it simply says you're entitled to 20 days plus the normal 8 bank holidays, then this isn't one of those normal 8 bank holidays. So it's a matter of then discretion for the employer as to whether or not they give it. So it's important in the drafting in terms of how you go about dealing with some of these issues, but putting your minds to it and setting it out in the right way from the outset of the relationship should avoid disputes down the line.
And I think another point perhaps to cover off is under that home working and hybrid issues, it's if you are employing people from more around the country, should you be putting into the contract, if they do have to come to the office, whether you pay for travel, whether you pay for a hotel, how many days they're expected to be in the office? So does all of that should be in the contracts of employment?
I mean, what often happens with a contract, because if you try and, I guess, lump everything into the contract and cover off every permutation and possibility, these contracts can become war and peace. And often that can be intimidating for particularly junior employees, where they get given this tomb of a document and, they're wondering what on earth half of it means. So it's that balance of covering off those key contractual matters that you need to make clear, then often it's complemented with an employee handbook where there are, I guess, more sort of policy and procedural type matters which are covered off in a usually quite, again, a lengthy document, but there's a whole suite of policies that are more generic and, you know, available to be reviewed, you know, whether in an intranet or in the office. So it's often a kind of combination of the two. You'll have a sort of contract which is concise and deals with those issues, and the contractual matters, the key benefits, the key terms for bonus, pay, holidays, etc. And then those sorts of expenses and you know, travel issues will often be dealt with in a policy within the employee handbook.
Yeah.
Okay. So kind of building on the same theme with contracts of employment, directors are, again, you can have executive directors, and I know there's going to be a talk shortly about non-executive directors, but certainly we've got an executive director who's carrying out a director function, but also an employment function. Again, there should be a contract of employment in place for those individuals from day one. Now, actually, under the Companies Act, where there are specific requirements for directors, there is also a requirement to have this available for inspection by the shareholders as part of the governance rules. So again, yes, you should have director service agreements in place for the directors in the business. And again, they should set out those basic terms I've talked about, but usually they go much further because they recognise the additional protections and controls and powers that the directors have in carrying out their responsibilities. So the key things that will normally be covered, I've mentioned there on the slide, but absolutely look at having the right terms in place, particularly if you kind of go separate ways, knowing what you're going to be paying, what the benefits are, what the termination arrangements are, will often be very important in terms of documenting this from an early stage.
Got a quick question for you there,
Yeah.
Reece, before we go on to 0 hours contracts. So what happens if you have some employees in England and some employees in Scotland? How do you just balance out the bank holidays? So, for instance, Scotland gets 2 days at New Year, doesn't it?
Yeah. So I think again, it's you would have your contract would be tailored to wherever the place of work is going to be, you know, carrying out the responsibilities. So you'd have a Scottish version, a Welsh version, where it would tailor for those separate, you know, bank holidays. Or alternatively, as I say, you would, you know, deal with that as any and all bank holidays across the UK, and then it would be applicable to wherever the work is performed.
Yeah.
But what you can't do is not give them that overall minimum entitlement to the applicable bank holidays for where they're carrying out their work.
Yeah.
And it's not to say, the other important thing on bank holidays is it's not an automatic right to say, you know, this Monday is a bank holiday, therefore I'm automatically required to take it off as leave. If you're an employer that works and doesn't shut the office and there's an expectation of continued output, then overall the entitlement for individuals on a full-time basis is to 28 days holiday, 5.6 weeks as it's referred to, inclusive of bank holidays. So if you require somebody to work on a bank holiday, as the employer, that's your prerogative, and you can require that, and they can take a day off out of their overall 28 days leave for the year on another day. So, as I say, it's not an automatic given that individuals have to be given time off on a particular bank holiday. Yes, that's very common in most places, but it's that the legal requirement is giving the right holiday across the overall year.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. 0 hours I've kind of covered to some degree. So, okay, remember, no exclusivity, only paid for the hours that they're working, often no guarantee of hours. Say it's purely 0 hours on an as and when basis. But the important part is giving detail as to how individuals are notified of what work is available. And the key thing is that there isn't usually an obligation to accept that. So unlike in an employment relationship where we're saying you're employed for 35 hours a week, we're going to pay you £25,000 a year salary, and therefore you've got to be in Monday to Friday, you know, 9 till 5 or whatever it is. In a 0 hours contract, you will say, we'll notify you a week in advance of any shifts that are available. If you can do them, great. These are the arrangements you need to follow in terms of accepting that work. But we fully accept that you might not be available because you could be working elsewhere. So it's that flexibility and very much difference in approach in terms of worker 0 hours status compared to employee. Then we're on to self-employed. As I say, normally in the form of a consultancy agreement. As I've mentioned, it could be direct or through a service company. And if it is through a service company, then you've got to be careful of this IR35 tax question. If you're a larger employer, so over to 250 employees, if you're over, I think it's 10 million turnover, there is now the sort of requirement that you carry out this, what's called a status determination questionnaire, where you as the sort of organization have to look at the tax treatment and whether the person is inside or outside of IR35. Now, as I say, that's a sort of topic I could talk about at length separately. So if anyone's got questions around use of contractors and IR35, by all means talk to me afterwards or another time, and I'll answer those separately. But it's an important consideration.
Yeah, so I had an interesting one, coupling it in with R&D tax. I'm a bit wary of time. Somebody was using contractors, and in the legislation for R&D tax, how they were claiming, they could claim their contractor, i.e. through a third party staff, as an eligible cost in their R&D claim. Because of IR35, they made them all go as consultants on projects. So they're only able to get around IR35. So this is your project for 3 months, and they delivered that. And then this is another contract for another project. That meant that they could no longer claim R&D tax for all of those costs. So they're now in this issue of what do we do? You know, do we employ them? We are aware of IR35. It's a real pickle for them to sort that out. And there are more aspects to this than just the IR35.
Yeah, there are absolutely. And I say, you know, while IR35 is a big tax question, then there are also, if you take them onto the payroll, they've got the additional employment rights and benefits. So it kind of spirals into other considerations.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is an important factor. So implications for getting it wrong, I said I'd come on to. So just not giving someone a contract or not covering off the right minimum terms that I've mentioned, there is an ability to claim up to 4 weeks pay as a tribunal claim. You can be taken to the employment tribunal. Now, that said, this isn't a freestanding claim, so it has to be kind of tacked on to a claim for discrimination or unfair dismissal. This can be brought alongside that. You can't just run off to tribunal and say, oh, you know, Joe Blogs Limited didn't give me a contract, therefore I want my 4 weeks pay. But again, it can be something that can be added into a claim, so it's an important factor to get right. Also, not having the right contracts can lead to, say, all sorts of disputes and ambiguity about, is a bonus due, is a benefit entitlement required? So just getting those terms dealt with correctly from the outset should cause a lot of those problems to hopefully not come to fruition. And then the final bit I'm just going to cover, because I'm conscious on time, is key issues arising from day one. So I've talked about things like unfair dismissal only arising after 2 years, but there are a lot of protections that staff have from day one. And the key ones are discrimination. So you can't treat somebody less favourably because of what's called a protected characteristic. And there are 9 protected grounds. So things like age, sex, race, sexual orientation, pregnancy, a whole range of factors where if that's the reason for why somebody is treated in a detrimental way, from day one, they can bring a claim against you. Likewise, whistleblowing. If they've blown the whistle and on a unlawful activity, and then you see them as a troublemaker and decide to get rid of them, even though they've not been with you for 2 years, that can be a sort of automatically unfair dismissal for which they can bring a claim from day one. So there are a number of factors which you've just got to be careful and think about before you dismiss somebody, to think, well, okay, in the normal sense, they've got to be with me 2 years before they can challenge this and bring a claim for unfair dismissal. But is there anything discriminatory in this? Have they blown the whistle on anything? And could that be the reason they point to for why we're sacking them? Have they raised any health and safety concerns is another one. Are they carrying out trade union activities? Is there something around, they've argued a statutory rights being breached, so working time is often a factor relied upon.